In the dying glow of a winter sunset, the mountains of old Japan seemed to hold their breath. The forests were hushed beneath a veil of drifting snow, and the only sound was the slow crunch of footsteps on an abandoned trail. A lone traveler, wrapped in a frayed indigo cloak, pushed deeper into the forgotten valley. Local villagers had warned him never to enter this place after dusk. They spoke of strange lights, unmarked graves, and shadows that moved even when the wind was still. But the traveler carried a question heavier than fear, a question whispered for centuries. What happened to the clan that should never be named? The trail ended at a clearing where the ruins of a shrine lay half swallowed by vines and time. The wooden beams sagged, the torii gate was split in two, and the stone lanterns were cracked like aging bones. Yet something about the place felt untouched, as if the years had circled around it without daring to enter. The traveler stepped forward. The snow suddenly thinned, revealing patches of dirt as though the earth itself refused to let the cold settle here. At the center of the shrine stood a fire pit, still warm, too warm for any ordinary visitor. Embers glowed beneath a lattice of charred wood, pulsing like a dying heart. The traveler froze. Someone had been here, recently, and deliberately. Then he saw it. A blackened samurai mask resting at the edge of the fire, half melted, half preserved. The lacquer had bubbled from the heat, but its expression remained eerily intact, frozen in a snarl that was neither rage nor sorrow, but something older, something ceremonial. As the traveler knelt beside it, a sharp gust of wind swept through the clearing, scattering ash across the snow. For a moment, the embers flared, illuminating faint markings carved along the inside of the mask. Symbols, not words, symbols that whispered of an order forgotten by most and feared by the rest. He lifted the mask. Its weight felt disproportionate, heavier than iron, heavier than history itself. As he turned it, a sudden crack split the silence. A beam from the ruined shrine collapsed, sending shards of wood skittering across the ground. The traveler spun, heart pounding. But no one stood there. No footprints, no shadows, no sign of life. Only the echo of something unseen withdrawing into the trees. Night settled quickly, as it often does in the mountains, swallowing the valley with a darkness that seemed intent on extinguishing all memory of light. The traveler lit a small oil lantern, its flame flickering nervously. He examined the mask again, tracing the strange carvings along the inner rim. The symbols resembled those recorded in obscure texts that scholars dismissed as exaggerations or folklore. But here they were, carved with intention and precision. The legends spoke of a clan of warriors so disciplined, so terrifyingly silent, that they were said to move like spirits through battle. They did not wear the crests of lords or families. They carried no banners, left no emblems, and accepted no glory. Their existence was not to be known, their deeds not to be sung, their rites not to be spoken of beyond the mountain temples that birthed them. They were the hidden clan, the shadow behind 1,000 victories that history had forgotten to record, or perhaps had been forced to forget. The traveler lowered the mask and scanned the shrine ruins more carefully. Beneath layers of moss, he could make out carvings on the stones, worn patterns that matched the symbols inside the mask. A circle intersected by 4 diagonal lines, a mark that supposedly represented the absence of a name. The clan, according to rumor, called themselves nothing. They believed a warrior's identity was a prison, a limitation. To transcend the self, one had to abandon the self. And so they did. A sudden rustling stirred behind him. He stood quickly, lantern raised. The trees swayed as if something had passed through them, a presence swift and soundless. The traveler felt a chill crawl up his spine, not from fear alone but from recognition. The stories he had followed for months suddenly felt painfully real. Someone else was watching. He approached the collapsed shrine entrance, where the wooden floor was scattered with frost-covered debris. Beneath a fallen beam, he noticed something glinting faintly. He reached for it, brushing away the ice. A small metal charm emerged, an omamori, but unlike any he had seen. It was fashioned from iron instead of fabric, engraved with the same nameless symbol. No shrine in Japan claimed such artifacts. None would dare. He pocketed the charm, his mind racing. Every clue pointed to a secret older and larger than he anticipated. But why had someone burned the mask tonight? Why return to an abandoned shrine after centuries? Why leave behind traces as if offering a trail? The wind shifted again, though the air remained unnaturally still. This time, the traveler sensed not danger, but invitation. A pull, subtle yet undeniable, as if the valley itself were urging him forward. He extinguished the lantern to let his eyes adjust to the moonlight. The snow reflected just enough glow to outline a faint path leading deeper into the woods. Path not marked on any map. He took a step. The forest seemed to react, branches arching overhead like the ribs of some giant creature. The shadows thickened but did not swallow him. Instead, they appeared to guide him. The deeper he went, the clearer the symbols became, carved into stones, etched into bark, arranged in patterns only visible to one who knew what to seek. The traveler felt a strange combination of dread and purpose. He had come in search of a story, a glimpse into an era when the line between the mortal and the mystical was thin enough to blur. Now, standing on the threshold of a truth long concealed, he wondered whether he was trespassing into a secret meant to remain hidden. But the mask had called him. The shrine had welcomed him. And the shadows, whatever or whoever controlled them, were waiting. He stepped forward again, deeper into the unknown. Behind him, the last ember in the fire pit flared one final time before collapsing into darkness, as if signaling that the journey he had begun could no longer be undone. And somewhere in the forest, a whisper rose, soft, distant, almost human. Do not seek the clan, unless the clan seeks you. Before the word samurai carried the weight of centuries, before honor became a creed and steel became destiny, Japan was a land of shifting shadows. The traveler who had found the burnt mask felt that truth settling over him as he descended along the moonlit path. To understand the hidden clan, one had to search further back, into an age when warriors were not yet bound by codes but by survival, superstition, and the primal forces of the land. Long before the rise of great families and warrior dynasties, the islands were carved into scattered provinces run by tribal chieftains. Their loyalties wavered like candle flames in the wind. Mountains breathed storms without warning. Forests swallowed the unwary, and spirits were believed to dwell in every stone, river, and gust of air. The people lived in awe of nature and in fear of those who claimed to speak with it, hermits, mediums, and wandering mystics who walked the line between the sacred and the forbidden. It was from these early mystics, legends said, that the ancestors of the hidden clan first emerged. They were not warriors then, but watchers, keepers of rituals that predated the organized temples. Their earliest presence was found not in heroic tales or battle epics, but in the margins of old myths, where the mundane world brushed against the unseen. These watchers learned the art of silence from the forests, patience from the mountains, and vigilance from the spirits they believed guided them. The traveler considered these stories as he followed the faint path deeper into the valley. The forest around him grew older, the trees thicker and strangely uniform, as if planted by design. Their trunks bore faint marks, some scratches, some symbols. Were these remnants of early watchers, or simply the work of nature? It was impossible to know, but everything about the landscape felt deliberate. During Japan's early centuries, the Yamato court struggled to assert control over distant regions. Their emissaries recorded stories of mountain dwellers who refused to kneel, warriors who appeared and vanished without trace, and villages governed not by lords but by councils of elders who worshipped no formal deity. These writings were brief, often dismissed by historians as exaggerations or the superstitions of frightened diplomats. Yet scattered references aligned too perfectly to ignore. One record described men without names who spoke to no gods but obeyed unseen laws older than the emperor. Another spoke of hill guardians, who protected passes and escorted travelers at night, only to disappear before dawn. Though written centuries apart, their imagery resonated with the silent figures seen in later battles, the same warriors the traveler sought now. As he walked, a thin mist began to coil between the trees. It rose in tendrils, lit by the pale moonlight, creating shifting silhouettes that made the forest seem alive. Every sound echoed strangely, as though the air itself listened. The traveler slowed his pace. The past was no longer just a story. It felt present, wrapped around him like an invisible cloak. In those ancient times, rituals formed the backbone of daily life. The Watchers mastered purification rites meant to cleanse body and spirit. They learned chants that calmed the mind and movements that synchronized breath with intention. Over generations, these practices sharpened their senses and discipline. When conflicts between tribes intensified, these Watchers were called upon not only as guides but as protectors. Thus began their transformation from mystics into warriors. They were not samurai in the later sense. No polished armor, no gleaming katana, no banners signifying allegiance. Their weapons were crude at first. Carved spears, stone blades, wooden staves hardened in fire. But their discipline set them apart. While other tribes relied on numbers and bold displays of force, the Watchers fought with precision, quiet footsteps, and an eerie calm that unnerved their enemies. Conflict shaped them, but secrecy defined them. Villagers whispered that they trained not in open fields but within sacred groves. Their rites prohibited shouting, boasting, or any act that revealed the self. They believed the greatest warrior was the one whose presence could not be felt until it was too late. Over time, their combat techniques evolved alongside their spiritual practices, blending the physical and the psychological into something unique. The traveler imagined these early warriors moving through forests much like the one he walked now. Figures cloaked not in cloth but in silence, observing the world with eyes trained to see what others overlooked. Perhaps they had walked this very path centuries before, carving symbols into bark as reminders of vows long forgotten by the rest of the world. Historians often debate when the true samurai emerged, but the transition was gradual. As clans consolidated power, warriors began to take on more formal roles. Metalworking advanced, forging superior blades. Codes of conduct evolved. Yet somewhere in the folds of this transition, the Watchers retreated deeper into obscurity. They chose silence over fame, anonymity over glory. Some believed they feared being absorbed into the rising samurai class. Others thought they rejected the increasing entanglement between warriors and politics. But a few scholars, including the missing Meiji academic the traveler had studied, proposed a more intriguing theory. The Watchers had already formed their own closed society, bound by rituals too sacred to share and too dangerous to reveal. This was the seed from which the hidden clan would one day grow. As the traveler pushed further, the mist thickened. The forest floor became uneven, punctuated by old stones half buried beneath roots. He paused at one such stone, rectangular, weathered, covered in moss. He brushed it gently, revealing carvings faint but unmistakable. Spirals intersecting with diagonal lines, matching the symbol found on the shrine ruins. A chill swept through him, not of fear, but confirmation. He was walking through a place older than samurai, older than written history. A place where the earliest Watchers once trained, prayed, or perhaps performed rites no outsider had ever witnessed. The air pulsed with quiet energy. The traveler felt as though he had stepped into the untouched fragment of a forgotten world. The stories were not exaggerated, they were incomplete. The Watchers were more than mystics or early warriors. They were the architects of a philosophy that demanded absolute discipline and the erasure of ego. And somewhere ahead lay the truths they left behind. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. If the hidden clan truly descended from these ancient Watchers, then their origins were not born from war, but from devotion to forces the modern world no longer understood. He exhaled and continued forward, deeper into the mist, where the past waited with patient silence. By the time the traveler emerged from the ancient mist, the forest opened onto a plateau where moonlight pooled like liquid silver. Here, the trees stood farther apart, and the ground felt strangely level, as if generations had walked this space until the earth itself bowed beneath their footsteps. The air grew still, almost reverent. It was in places like this, quiet pockets carved into the wilderness, that the early Watchers began shaping ideas that would one day be known as the warrior's code. But Bushido did not appear fully formed. It was not written in a single scroll, nor proclaimed by a single leader. It evolved slowly, merging tribal instincts, spiritual beliefs, and the harsh necessities of survival. Before it became a code of honor, it was a rhythm of life, born from farmers who defended their fields, hunters who tracked in silence, and sentinels who guarded their homes from unseen threats. Courage was simply the refusal to abandon one's people. Loyalty was the thread that bound small communities together. Duty emerged from the understanding that a single mistake could cost many lives. Yet within this gradual evolution, there existed a branch of thought far stricter, far more unforgiving. The early watchers believed that the world was constantly shifting between order and chaos, and only those who mastered themselves could influence that balance. Where other tribes taught bravery through chants or communal rituals, the watchers enforced silence, introspection, and relentless discipline. Their worldview was shaped not just by survival, but by a desire to transcend fear entirely. This was the foundation of what would become the Hidden Clan's philosophy. The traveler moved across the plateau, noticing faint impressions on the ground. Stone foundations long eroded, circular depressions, and lines that may once have been paths. It looked like the remnants of an ancient training ground. He knelt, brushing his fingers against the frosted soil, trying to imagine the people who once stood here. Young initiates rising before dawn, elders overseeing their progress, warriors practicing movements so quiet even birds did not startle. In those early centuries, training was not focused on strength or grand technique. Instead, the watchers cultivated stillness. A warrior who could still his heartbeat could remain invisible. A warrior who could control his breath could control his fear. A warrior who could erase his presence could reshape the outcome of battles before they even began. While the future samurai would emphasize honor and reputation, the watchers emphasized anonymity and service. They rejected the ego that demanded praise. Instead, they believed identity itself was a burden. A name tied you to your past. A family crest tied you to obligations. Emotion clouded judgment. To them, the true warrior was a vessel empty, precise, guided only by purpose. It was here, on quiet plateaus like this one, that the earliest version of Bushido diverged into two paths: the public path embraced by clans and lords, and the hidden path followed by those who would one day become the most mysterious warriors in Japan's history. The traveler rose and walked toward the far edge of the plateau, where a series of tall stones jutted from the earth. Each stone bore faint carvings, straight lines intersecting curves, forming patterns that resembled meditative diagrams. These were likely markers for mental training. The watchers believed the mind could be shaped like steel, tempered by pressure, sharpened by hardship, and polished through silence. They practiced what they called the unseen stance, a posture that balanced the body so perfectly that movement could occur instantly in any direction. They perfected a breathing method that allowed them to endure cold, hunger, and long periods of stillness. They trained their eyes to track subtle shifts in light and shadow, reading the landscape the way others read written words. But more important than their physical techniques was their emotional discipline. The watchers taught that anger was a wildfire, grief a storm, fear a binding rope. These emotions were not to be suppressed but understood so thoroughly that they dissolved before taking form. The warrior who mastered emotion mastered fate. As centuries passed, this disciplined worldview influenced the emerging samurai class. Philosophers, monks, and generals wrote treatises on duty and honor, many echoing ideas that had been practiced by the watchers long before. Over time, these writings were codified, debated, refined, and passed down until the code became recognizable as Bushido. But something changed as the code grew into mainstream warrior culture. Bushido became a tool of governance. Lords used it to ensure loyalty. Schools taught it to instill pride. It became a banner, a symbol, a declaration. The warrior's purpose shifted from inner mastery to outward duty. Reputation mattered. Lineage mattered. Honor became external, something others bestowed upon you. For the watchers, this transformation was a corruption. To them, the purity of discipline was compromised the moment it served politics instead of the self. They saw the new warrior code as rigid, theatrical, and loud. Where they valued silence, samurai valued reputation. Where they trained to vanish, samurai trained to stand out. Where they erased their names, samurai emblazoned theirs onto banners. The Watchers chose their path deliberately. They retreated deeper into the mountains. They closed their teachings to outsiders. Their rituals became more secretive, more symbolic, more sacred. And from this isolation grew an identity that would become the core of the hidden clan. A group that rejected the direction Japan was moving and instead forged a code that demanded absolute surrender of the self. A stricter, darker variant of Bushido. It was said that their creed had 3 sacred pillars: silence, sacrifice, and purification. Silence preserved clarity. Sacrifice preserved purpose. Purification preserved connection to forces beyond human understanding. Anyone seeking to join their order had to abandon their name, relinquish their past, and undergo a rite that severed them from worldly identity. The traveler felt a shiver, not of cold, but of realization. He understood now why the clan became so elusive. They had not simply hidden. They had removed themselves from the flow of history by design. Their discipline was so intense that even glimpses of their existence vanished unless someone knew precisely where to look. As he crossed the plateau, the moon dipped behind a drifting cloud. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the ancient stones seemed to lean inward. The traveler could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes, perhaps only memory, perhaps more, watching him with quiet curiosity. He wondered what the Watchers would think of the world now. A world where the samurai were remembered through tales of honor and battle. But the clan that shaped the silent foundation beneath that honor had been erased, forbidden, or forgotten. Bushido, as known today, was only half the story. The other half, the part born from mystics who walked in shadows, from warriors who rejected identity, from rituals that demanded complete transformation, had never been allowed to enter the history books. The traveler took a slow breath. With every step, the forest, the stones, the silence, all felt like echoes of an ancient doctrine waiting to be understood again. And somewhere ahead, deeper in the mountains, lay the place where this hidden interpretation of the warrior's code had taken its final, forbidden form. The traveler descended from the plateau, and the terrain shifted once more. The forest thickened into a darker, older world, where the branches intertwined like tangled veins. Every root, every stone seemed to hide something beneath it. The trail he followed dissolved into patches of earth worn smooth by countless footsteps long before maps existed. It was here, in this deep cradle of the mountains, that traces of the nameless clan flickered in and out of history like ghosts afraid of being seen. The clan had no name, not officially, not in writing, not even in whispered oral tradition. Historians later coined vague labels for them: the Silent Order, the Shadowborn, the Mountain Phantoms. But these titles never appeared in ancient documents. Instead, their presence had to be assembled from scattered fragments. Symbols carved into temple wood, cryptic verses in Heian poetry, battlefield diaries where terrified soldiers described warriors with no crest on their armor. To the traveler, the most haunting detail was this: names defined clans. Names carved legacy. Names passed lineage from father to son. But this clan had chosen to erase themselves. In a world where identity meant honor, they had walked away from identity entirely. That decision alone made them more dangerous, more unpredictable, and far more intriguing than any warrior group officially recorded. He paused at a moss-coated tree where faint carvings spiraled upward. The markings matched the same symbol he had seen on the mask and on the ancient stones. A circle intersected by 4 lines, representing neither sun nor moon, neither land nor sky. Scholars theorized many meanings: cycles, unity, transcendence, but none felt precise. The symbol resisted interpretation, as if the clan wanted their truth concealed beneath layers of mystery. As he studied the markings, the traveler recalled a poem from an 11th century anthology. It spoke of warriors whose footsteps stain no snow, and men of discipline whose names travel only in wind. The poet never explained these images, likely fearing the censorship of the era. But the suggestion was clear. Even in a time when warlords boasted their strength in poetry and art, this hidden group remained unspoken, unclaimed. Perhaps silence was their truest weapon. The traveler continued deeper, and with each step the forest felt more curated, as if shaped by human intention. Stones arranged in subtle patterns. Tree trunks cut cleanly generations ago. Fallen branches placed neatly rather than randomly. It felt like a place maintained by hands that refused to leave a footprint. Records from ancient temples hinted at meetings with a group who sought no blessing, only permission to pass silently through the night. They paid with service, not coin. Guarding sacred texts, protecting monks during times of political unrest, retrieving stolen relics. They never gave names. They never returned favors. They simply appeared when needed, then vanished when the task was done. One temple log, written by a frightened monk during a time of bandit raids, described a night when shadows moved among shadows, and fear left the bandits before steel ever touched them. But the monk's superior ordered that entry to be struck out. The original page was torn, burned, or hidden. Yet a single sentence in the margins survived. Their loyalty is to none, not even to themselves. That sentence disturbed the traveler the first time he read it, and it disturbed him even now. He wondered what it meant to be loyal to nothing. Not a lord, not a creed, not even personal ambition. How could such warriors exist in a world where alliances defined survival? As he moved forward, the earth dipped, revealing a narrow ravine with a stream running through it. The sound of water echoed softly, distorted by the tight walls of rock. He descended carefully, and the ravine opened into a small clearing. There, partially hidden beneath vines and snow, stood a stone tablet unlike any he had seen. He brushed away the frost and read the carvings. Lines, shapes, and curves arranged in a sequence that seemed purposeful but foreign. It was not classical Japanese script. It was not Chinese. It was something older or perhaps invented by the clan themselves. Some scholars believed the clan created their own symbolic writing, used only in rituals and internal communication. Others argued these markings were not linguistic but spiritual maps of motion, breath, or meditation. A few dismissed them entirely as meaningless decoration. But the traveler's instincts said otherwise. There was coherence in the patterns, repetition, structure, intention. He traced one line with his finger. The stone felt unusually warm. Nearby, half buried in the soil, was a fragment of lacquered wood. He lifted it gently. Its surface held the faint outline of the same nameless symbol. This fragment once belonged to something larger, a shield? A ceremonial object? A tablet recording the clan's laws? It was impossible to know, but its craftsmanship spoke of devotion. The traveler imagined the people who carved these symbols, men and women who had given up their identities to join a purpose greater than themselves. Did they feel pride? Or was pride forbidden? Did they mourn loved ones left behind? Or did they strip themselves of such attachments? Their anonymity made them seem almost inhuman. Yet their traces, these carvings, this wood, the burned mask, carried the fingerprints of human hands, human fears, human discipline. He stood, holding the fragment as wind stirred the trees overhead. For a moment he thought he saw movement beyond the clearing. A flicker, presence. Not quite human, not quite spirit, something between. When he blinked, it was gone. The clan appeared in history like that too. Fleeting, impossible to grasp, always at the edges of other people's stories. A battlefield account here, a temple notation there, a passing reference in a general's memoir. Enough to form a shadow, but never enough to illuminate the figure casting it. Why did they never choose a name? The traveler pondered this as he walked. Perhaps a name would have anchored them to the world they were trying to transcend. Names carried expectations. Clan titles invited political entanglement. A crest could be destroyed. Honor could be tarnished. But a nameless order? That was harder to capture. Harder to betray. Harder to erase. In legends, the most dangerous beings were often those who hid their names. Spirits, demons, wandering gods. Speaking their names was believed to bind them. Perhaps the clan saw wisdom in that. Perhaps they believed that by refusing a name, they freed themselves from every chain the world tried to place upon them. The traveler eventually reached the far edge of the ravine, where the ground climbed sharply toward another forested rise. He paused, looking back at the clearing one last time. The tablet, the carvings, the air that seemed alive with memory. All of it hinted at a truth deeper than simple secrecy. This was not a group forgotten by accident. They were forgotten by intention. Their anonymity was a shield, a philosophy, and a weapon. And somewhere ahead, the travelers sensed, their story would begin to take shape. Not as a collection of scattered fragments, but as a living narrative waiting to be uncovered. He tightened his cloak and pressed forward, unaware that the next discovery would be far less silent and far more unsettling. The forest thinned as the traveler climbed, and soon he found himself overlooking a broad valley shrouded in drifting mist. The moon hung low, caught between clouds like a lantern dimmed by breath. In the distance, the faint outlines of terraced fields and abandoned watchtowers marked the remains of a place that had once tasted war. Though centuries had passed, something in the air still held the echo of violence, an echo that seemed to vibrate beneath the quiet surface of the night. This valley was known in old records by many names, though one title appeared more than others: the Moonlit Fields. Legends said that on a long-forgotten night, a battle was fought here that defied every rule of warfare known at the time. A confrontation so swift, so silent, so unsettling that even hardened generals refused to speak of it afterward. What remained were fragments. Soldiers' journals written in trembling strokes, forgotten clan scrolls hastily sealed away, and rumors passed down by villagers who claimed to have seen phantoms moving under the moon. The traveler descended into the valley, his footsteps soft against the frost-coated grass. The land seemed to watch him as he walked. An unnatural stillness clung to the fields, as though the earth itself remembered what transpired here and was reluctant to disturb the memory. He reached a ridge where stones protruded from the ground in odd formations, arranged not by nature, but by human hands marking graves long unvisited. He knelt beside the nearest stone and brushed aside dried leaves. The carving was faded, barely visible, but the characters spelled the name of a minor foot soldier from a clan that no longer existed. He moved to another stone, then another. All bore the names of common soldiers, never officers, never samurai. Those men had lived and died in obscurity, but the stories of their final night had survived in scattered accounts. He stood and faced the open field. The wind stirred, carrying with it a faint scent of pine and cold metal. And then, as if the past wished to reveal itself, the valley began to whisper its story. That night, centuries ago, the moon was full. Its light spread across the battlefield like a pale veil, illuminating two opposing armies preparing for a confrontation expected to last until sunrise. The defending force, outnumbered but resolute, fortified their positions at the ridge. The attacking army positioned their archers along the opposite slope, waiting for the signal to begin. But before the first arrow could be loosed, an eerie hush swept across the valley. Soldiers who wrote about that moment described it as a silence that pressed against the skin. A sensation so jarring that even experienced warriors felt their throats tighten. Torches flickered strangely, as though struggling against an invisible wind. Horses shifted uneasily, sensing something the humans could not yet see. Then came the figures, not marching, not charging, moving. They emerged from the mist in small groups, their silhouettes barely distinguishable from the drifting fog. They wore no clan insignia. Their armor carried no family crest. Their movements were impossibly smooth, too synchronized to be coincidence, too quiet to be natural. Some soldiers later wrote that the figures glided rather than stepped, their feet leaving no impression in the frost. Panic rippled through the ranks of both armies. Some men believed the dead had risen. Others whispered that spirits of the mountains had descended. But the truth was far more human, and infinitely more terrifying. The hidden clan had arrived. No one expected them. No one had hired them. No record explained why they intervened or who their target was. But what happened next was etched into history not through official documents, but through survivors' nightmares. The first sound was a soft whistle, sharp, brief, and followed by a fall of bodies. Archers collapsed before they could draw their strings. Patrol captains reached for their swords only to find them torn away by unseen hands. It was as if the mist itself carried blades. The moonlight caught the brief glint of steel, but the warriors behind the blades remained shadows. The traveler imagined the chaos. Shouts swallowed by silence, torches knocked aside, men stumbling through fog that thickened at precisely the wrong moments. One soldier had written that he felt a presence behind him only when the cold edge of a blade touched his neck, and then, inexplicably, the blade withdrew. The clan did not kill everyone. They struck only specific targets, precise as surgeons. Their movement followed a pattern no army had seen before. They weaved between both sides, neutral in appearance but lethal in execution. They did not fight to win a battle. They fought to shape its outcome, erasing individuals who were key to the unfolding of war. By the time the valley's defenders realized what was happening, the mist had grown denser, lit by the moon in strange, haunting flashes. Soldiers reported hearing footsteps that seemed to echo from impossible angles. Shadows darted across the edges of vision, disappearing before they could be confronted. The attackers, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, attempted to retreat. But retreating only led them into deeper pockets of mist where the silent warriors waited. Some combatants fled screaming, abandoning weapons and armor. Others dropped to their knees, believing judgment from the spirits had come. And then, as quickly as they appeared, the figures began to withdraw. A strange calm settled over the field. The mist thinned. The moon cast its full light again. The opposing armies looked around to find their ranks decimated not by each other, but by someone else entirely. Officers on both sides, strategists, envoys, certain lieutenants, were missing, their bodies never found. Those who remained were so shaken that neither side resumed the fight. At sunrise, they abandoned the valley altogether. The battle that was meant to reshape the region ended without a victor. Only silence remained. The traveler walked slowly across the same ground where that impossible night had unfolded. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down, as if the valley carried the memory like an old wound that never fully healed. He reached the center of the field and noticed something odd. A patch of earth that felt firmer, darker, as though scorched long ago. He knelt and touched the soil, cold, still. But beneath it, he sensed something lingering. A presence, a memory, a whisper of intention. The hidden clan had not participated in the battle to serve a lord or protect a village. They had intervened because someone among the armies threatened to balance the clan guarded. That idea was unsettling in its implications. If the clan acted according to their own internal code, not for loyalty, not for money, not for glory, then they wielded a power no warlord could control. A power that could alter the fate of nations without leaving proof. No wonder history tried to erase them. The traveler stood and looked across the valley once more. The mist had begun to gather again, curling around the graves and creeping toward the edges of the field. The night seemed to grow colder, sharper, as if inviting him to understand the deeper meaning behind what occurred here. This battle was not just a demonstration of the clan's prowess. It was a warning, a message carved into the memory of anyone who survived. The clan without a name could shape the outcome of wars, determine who lived and who vanished, and do so without revealing their faces, their motive, or their creed. They were ghosts not because they were supernatural, but because they chose to exist outside the boundaries of history. As the traveler turned to leave the valley, a faint breeze rustled the frosted grass behind him. It sounded almost like footsteps, soft, light, disciplined. He did not dare look back. The path leading out of the moonlit fields curved upward into dense woodland, where the trees grew taller and the air felt heavier. The traveler followed it slowly, feeling the valley's silence still clinging to him like a second skin. But as he climbed, that silence shifted, no longer the hush of memory, but the quiet of isolation. The forest thickened, branches interlocking like the ribs of some ancient beast, swallowing the moonlight until only faint silver threads filtered down. This was the territory the old texts hinted at, a place rarely marked on maps, spoken of only in coded references. The Watchers and their descendants, the ancestors of the hidden clan, were said to have trained far from civilization in places thought inhospitable even to wild animals. These remote sanctuaries were not monasteries or temples. They were crucibles, spaces designed to strip a person bare and rebuild them in the image of the clan. The traveler soon discovered one such place. The forest abruptly broke open into a clearing so circular, so unnaturally perfect, that it seemed shaped by deliberate hands rather than erosion or chance. The trees surrounding the space leaned toward its center, as though bowing to it. But what captured his attention was the structure standing in the middle, a rectangular foundation of stone and charred timber. Ruins long abandoned, yet not quite surrendering to time. This was the forbidden dojo. He approached cautiously. Every step felt like trespass. The ground was packed hard from generations of disciplined training. Even centuries later, the earth carried the faint imprint of countless feet stepping in precise, repeated patterns. The dojo itself was little more than a skeletal outline, but its dimensions were unmistakably intentional, the craftsmanship refined even in decay. He crouched beside one of the fallen beams. Its wood had blackened beyond recognition, hardened as if fire had once consumed the entire structure. Yet the burn did not look accidental. It had the pattern of a ritual, controlled, purposeful, final. A cleansing by flame, perhaps to erase evidence or to honor a vow completed. The traveler stood, sensing the weight of history pressing in. What had happened here? Why had such a place, built with devotion and secrecy, been deliberately destroyed? He stepped deeper into the ruins and began to imagine the dojo as it once was. The roof high and austere, the floor smooth from endless practice, the walls adorned with cryptic symbols that served not as decoration but as instruction. Young initiates would have gathered here before dawn, not speaking, not questioning, their breath forming mist in the icy mountain air as they waited for the master to appear. Their training, according to fragments left behind, was nothing like the structured martial arts taught to ordinary warriors. This was not about mastering a sword style or perfecting form. Their discipline targeted the deepest layers of the self: instinct, fear, ego. The first stage of training was isolation. New recruits were forbidden to speak for weeks. Silence was not punishment. It was preparation. Only when a mind was quiet could it perceive the world's subtleties. The slightest shift in wind, the tremor of a hidden enemy, the thinning of breath from a frightened opponent. All of these details became clear to one who embraced silence. The second stage was deprivation. Initiates fasted under supervision, not to weaken them but to cleanse the body and sharpen the senses. They were required to meditate through hunger, cold, even pain, learning to sever the link between discomfort and reaction. Only those who endured without breaking were allowed to continue. The third stage was confrontation, not with others but with the self. Recruits were guided into underground chambers where darkness reigned. They were left alone for hours, sometimes days, forced to face their own thoughts without distraction. Some emerged stronger. Others emerged different. A few never emerged at all. These methods sounded brutal, perhaps cruel. But to the clan, these trials were essential. A warrior who could not conquer his inner turmoil would never move with the precision and clarity required to serve the clan's purpose. Strength meant nothing if the mind faltered. The traveler stood at the center of the ruins, and for a moment he imagined the clan's master, an elder with eyes sharpened by decades of silence, walking among the students. The master's presence alone could supposedly still a room, not from authority, but from the sheer intensity of discipline radiating from within. Legends claimed the master could sense a lie before it was spoken and detect hesitation in a heartbeat. Training in the forbidden dojo forged warriors who did not simply fight. They became instruments of intention. Tools honed to act without fear, without doubt, without identity. Yet among all the rites taught here, one remained the most mysterious. A ritual so forbidden that even the clan's own records referenced it only obliquely. The ritual that transformed an initiate into something beyond a warrior. The traveler found a stone platform at the dojo's far end, cracked but unmistakably ceremonial. Ashes still clung to its surface, protected by centuries of still currents. The markings around it, circles interwoven with diagonal cuts, matched the clan's symbol. This platform was the heart of the dojo, the place where the final rite had been performed. Some believed the ritual involved a symbolic death, the initiate burying their former identity, severing all ties to family, history, and self. Others believed it was more literal, involving near-death experiences that forced the initiate's mind into a state of transcendence. A few theorized it involved fire, judging by the dojo's scorched remains. Whatever the truth, the transformation was irreversible. Once a recruit underwent the rite, they were no longer considered a person. They were a vessel, a shadow belonging only to the clan. The traveler felt a wave of unease wash over him. Not fear of the place, but awe. The discipline demanded here was unlike anything he had imagined. It went beyond military training, beyond devotion, beyond sacrifice. This dojo was not just a training ground. It was a forge designed to unmake and remake human beings according to a code so strict it had no room for personal will. He looked around the ruins once more. The silence felt heavier now, like the lingering presence of spirits who had never fully left. Perhaps they watched him from the edges of vision. Perhaps they judged his intrusion. Or perhaps the dojo was not entirely abandoned. A sudden rustle came from the trees behind him, light, deliberate, controlled. Not a deer, not the wind. The traveler turned slowly. The forest returned to stillness. But he knew, without doubt, that someone had been watching him the entire time. And somewhere in this silent ruin, the memory of the forbidden rite stirred, as if awakening after centuries of rest. The wind tapered into a faint sigh as the traveler slowed his breathing, staring into the dark edges of the ruined dojo where something had moved only moments before. Though the forest had fallen still again, the sense of being watched clung to him like damp cloth. It wasn't paranoia, it was presence. A quiet, disciplined presence, one that carried the echo of ancient rites whispered through centuries of secrecy. He stepped closer to the stone platform at the rear of the dojo, the charred beams casting jagged shadows across the ground. Every instinct told him this was the heart of the clan's most feared transformation, the place where warriors stopped being men and became something else entirely. The rite performed here was known among early scrolls by a single phrase, the rite of unmaking. No scholar had ever fully understood its meaning. Some dismissed it as poetic exaggeration. Others claimed it hinted at psychological conditioning far ahead of its time. But the traveler now stood where it happened, and the air itself seemed heavy with the residue of what had taken place. He knelt slowly, brushing dust and fragments of charred wood from the stone platform. The surface was etched with symbols so faint they almost blended with time. Circular patterns intertwined with sharp lines resembled constellations fractured by force. He pressed his hand against the stone. The chill pierced his skin, yet at its center, a strange warmth pulsed faintly, as if remembering. The rite of unmaking began long before a warrior ever stepped onto the platform. It started the moment an initiate agreed to abandon his identity. The clan believed the self was the root of all weakness. To be a perfect instrument, one had to sever the emotional cords that tied them to past, desire, ego, and even fear. Weeks before the rite, initiates were stripped of their names. Not ceremonially, but absolutely. They were not permitted to speak their birth names, write them, or even think them. Masters used chants and meditative commands to guide initiates into dissolving their identities layer by layer. Some handled it with stoic discipline. Others resisted, clinging to memories of parents, lovers, or past glories. Those who resisted too long were dismissed or disappeared. Once an initiate's identity weakened, the physical trials began. Days spent sleepless, meditating in icy riverbeds. Nights standing motionless beneath waterfalls that hammered the body into numbness. Blindfolded walks across narrow cliff edges where missteps meant death. All designed to force an initiate into surrendering instinctive reactions. A warrior who reacted from emotion could not serve the clan. Only one who acted from pure clarity could survive the rite. The traveler imagined rows of young warriors kneeling in silence within this dojo, their breath synchronized, their wills aligned toward a single future. He tried to picture their faces, but every attempt resulted in featureless silhouettes, perhaps mirroring how they saw themselves. The true rite began only when an initiate reached the threshold of breaking. At midnight, beneath a moon chosen for its symbolic alignment, the master summoned the initiate to the stone platform. The other clan members formed a circle around them, their silhouettes unmoving, their faces hidden behind lacquered masks. Masks similar to the one the traveler had found at the shrine. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind threading through the trees. The initiate stepped forward alone. The masters asked no questions. They offered no reassurance. For the clan, mercy clouded the purpose, and purpose was everything. The first stage of the rite required the initiate to confess, not with words, but with breath. They were instructed to close their eyes and breathe deeply until every memory, every regret, every fear rose to the surface. The masters believed breath was the bridge between the mortal body and the unseen realm. Through it, the initiate purged themselves, exhaling everything that bound them to their former life. The second stage was symbolic death. The initiate lay upon the stone platform, arms crossed over their chest. The masters circled them, chanting in a low, rhythmic tone that blended with the night. Their chants weren't religious. They were psychological, designed to push the initiate's consciousness into a suspended state where the self loosened its grip. Some texts suggested herbs or incense were used to induce a trance. Others hinted at prolonged deprivation or controlled stress. The goal was always the same, to break the final thread of identity. The traveler felt his heartbeat sync with the imagined rhythm. He wondered if the stone beneath him had held countless bodies trembling in the darkness as they faced their dissolution. The final stage was rebirth. But this rebirth was not symbolic. The masters lifted the initiate from the platform and carried them to the edge of the woods, where a deep pit had been prepared. The initiate was lowered into the darkness and left there until dawn. The pit was narrow, forcing the initiate into stillness. Some described it as a grave, others as a womb, alone in the cold earth, deprived of light, sound, and movement. The initiate was forced to confront the void inside themselves. Some broke down, screaming for release. Others prayed. But those who succeeded emerged at sunrise changed. Their voices took on a different tone. Quiet, controlled, devoid of hesitation. Their posture shifted. Their eyes hardened or softened, depending on the initiate, but always reflected something final. When they rose from the pit, the masters greeted them not as men, but as shadows reborn. The clan called them emptied ones. They bore no name, no past, no personal desire. They were considered spiritually hollow, ready to be filled only with the clan's purpose. And from that moment, an initiate belonged not to themselves, but entirely to the clan. The traveler stood and exhaled slowly. It was difficult to imagine a transformation so absolute. Even the strictest samurai rituals never demanded such total surrender. The rite of unmaking went beyond discipline. It reshaped the soul. But shadows of cruelty lingered too. For every initiate who emerged reborn, how many were buried deeper than the pit could hold? How many spirits shattered in that darkness, lost to a ritual no one dared question? As he stepped away from the platform, a chill brushed the back of his neck. The forest seemed to shift, its shadows curling like smoke. Something was moving again, something he could not see but could feel keenly. He turned, scanning the treeline. Shapes flickered in the corner of his vision. Nothing distinct, yet unmistakably present. A faint breath of cold drifted past him, stirring his cloak. He realized the truth then. This rite had not died with the clan. Its echo lived on in the land, in the air, in the silence. Perhaps the watchers who trained here had not entirely vanished. Perhaps the remnants of the clan still guarded these mountains, bound by vows older than recorded history. Or perhaps the very ritual, soaked into the soil through centuries of practice, watched him in return. The traveler felt the forest breathe around him as the moon sank lower. Somewhere deeper in the mountains, another truth waited, one even more unsettling than the rite itself. The hidden clan did not simply train in silence. They became silence, and silence, once awakened, has a way of following. Dawn crept over the mountains slowly, as if wary of illuminating the secrets hidden in the folds of the land. The traveler had walked for hours, leaving behind the ruined dojo and the chilling echo of the rite of unmaking. As the first pale strands of sunlight touched the treetops, the forest shifted from silver to gold, revealing a different world, one shaped not by ghosts, but by the ambitions of centuries past. For though the hidden clan perfected their training in isolation, they did not remain separate from the world forever. Their existence, however concealed, had consequences. And those consequences rippled outward in ways few could have predicted. The traveler reached a narrow ridge overlooking a sweeping expanse of valleys, rice fields, and distant castle silhouettes. In the era when samurai clans ruled Japan with iron wills and whisper-thin alliances, these sprawling domains were battlegrounds of political ambition, treachery, and power. And it was within this labyrinth of rival daimyos that the hidden clan emerged not as conquerors, but as invisible instruments of influence. They were warriors, yes, but more than that, they were leverage. A lord who possessed their allegiance, even briefly, held a tool capable of altering fate without leaving a trace. The first recorded instance of such involvement appeared in a chronicle written by a retainer of the Yamana clan. He described negotiations between two feuding families on the verge of open war. The atmosphere was tense, the meeting hall thick with incense and concealed grudges. But something happened that night, something unexplainable. A senior envoy from one clan suddenly reversed his stance, agreeing to terms his lord had sworn he would never accept. Rumors whispered that the envoy had been visited in the dark by a figure who emerged silently from the shadows, spoke no words, and left behind a single carved symbol on the tatami floor. The envoy, chilled to his core, reconsidered his loyalties. The treaty was signed at dawn. The Yamana retainer ended his account with a cryptic line: "A warrior who does not declare himself is twice as dangerous." The traveler moved along the ridge, letting the breeze bring him the distant sense of villages waking to morning chores. Smoke rising from hearths, roosters crowing. Life continued oblivious to the hidden hands that once shaped their ancestors' destinies. With each century, the hidden clan skill became an open secret among Japan's elite. They were not mercenaries, never available for hire through coin alone. Nor were they assassins, though their methods were often mistaken for assassination. They operated through a different currency: purpose. A purpose known only to their elders. But daimyos, desperate to secure every possible advantage, interpreted the clan's involvement as allegiance. Whether the clan intended to support one side or merely correct a dangerous imbalance, the result looked the same: a clan saved by a silent intervention or undone by it. During the Sengoku period, the age of constant warfare, rumors of these silent warriors intensified. Some spoke of them as myth. Others claimed to have fought beside them. An aging samurai, writing in the margins of a battlefield log, described a night raid on a rebel fort. The samurai and his men prepared to attack, expecting fierce resistance. But when they entered the fortress walls, they found the rebel leaders already dead. Positions collapsed from within. Not a single guard remembered seeing intruders. The only clue was a faint marking on a beam near the main gate. The same nameless symbol. The samurai's diary ended with a confession of gratitude and fear. "I do not know if we were saved," he wrote, "or warned." The traveler paused at a cluster of rocks that offered a clear view of an ancient road winding like a thread between two hills. That road had witnessed countless crossings. Lords carried in palanquins, traders hauling goods, messengers delivering urgent scrolls sealed with wax. And beneath it all, unnoticed footprints may have once been pressed by warriors who did not wish to leave marks behind. The hidden clan did not serve one lord consistently. They would intervene for a daimyo one year and act against him the next. Their loyalty was not for sale nor predictable. This unpredictability made them invaluable and terrifying. One clan lord, it was said, tried to force their allegiance by capturing a young member of the order. For 3 days he interrogated the captive, demanding the clan's secrets. On the 4th day, the lord's retainers found him alone in his chamber, face pale, eyes wide in terror. The captive was gone, without breaking a single lock or cutting a single rope. The only sign of his presence was a pattern of ash on the floor. The Lord never spoke of the incident again. The traveler's path curved downward toward a riverbank where an ancient stone bridge crossed quietly over water. He stepped onto the bridge, noting the moss-covered edges and the faint symbols carved into its underside. Travelers would pass over this bridge for centuries without ever noticing the markings. Yet to a trained eye, they were unmistakable. It was here that another story unfolded, one involving diplomacy, deception, and a single silent figure. During a tense dispute between two vassal families, emissaries met on this bridge to swear a pact of non-aggression. Each side distrusted the other, fearing treachery even during negotiation. But witnesses recorded that just before the oaths were sworn, a masked figure appeared at the far end of the bridge, standing still, watching. No one could explain the figure's presence. He spoke nothing, moved nothing, but his mere silhouette, outlined against the rising sun, delivered a message all understood instinctively. Break the peace, and the clan without a name would intervene. The pact held for 7 years, an eternity in those unstable times. The traveler continued along the river, feeling the weight of these stories like stones in his pocket. The hidden clan's influence was not always violent. Sometimes it manifested as negotiation carried out in silence. A glance, a symbol, a presence sensed but not seen. And as daimyos learned of their existence, they began to fight not only their visible enemies, but invisible ones as well. Some lords created countermeasures, hiring shinobi to detect the clan's movements. Others fortified their castles with traps designed to hinder silent intruders. But nothing ever worked reliably. The hidden clan adapted faster than any lord's defenses. The most cunning daimyos, however, sought alliance. They offered rare texts, access to sacred lands, support for mountain temples. They believed, incorrectly, that favor could sway the clan. But the clan acted only when their own internal judgment deemed intervention necessary. Their motives remained as hidden as their faces. By the time Japan unified under stronger leadership, the clan's presence in political affairs decreased. They became myths, shadows fading into old stories told around winter hearths. But the marks they left on history, those subtle shifts in fate, endured. The traveler stopped by the river, watching the current ripple past rocks smoothed by centuries. He understood now that the clan's involvement in the affairs of lords had not been a mere footnote in history. It had been a quiet force steering the direction of an entire nation. A force unseen, unclaimed, and unnamed. And the deeper he walked into their legacy, the more he sensed that the clan's silence was not absence. It was waiting. Waiting for something, or someone. As the sunlight strengthened, he continued onward, unaware that the next revelation would draw him closer to the boundary between history and myth, truth and secrecy, and the moment when the shogun's warning would strike like a blade drawn in the dark. The traveler followed the river until the landscape shifted once more. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the faint metallic scent of distant snow. Ahead, the trees parted to reveal a narrow road paved with uneven stones, an ancient route once used by government envoys and patrolling soldiers. Even now, centuries later, the road felt tense, as if still bearing the weight of political pressure that once pressed into its stones. For this was the path that led toward the seat of power during the Tokugawa era, when the shogunate ruled with a steady, unwavering hand. And it was during that era, at the height of centralized control, that the clan without a name became too visible, too influential, too unsettling. The shogun's warning began as a whisper. The traveler imagined how it must have happened. Isolated reports of unmarked warriors intervening in conflicts, rumors of silent figures altering the fates of high-ranking officials, tales of symbols carved beneath bridges and inside council chambers. These whispers reached the wrong ears, or perhaps the right ones, those belonging to men charged with preserving absolute order. The Tokugawa regime feared unpredictability above all else. Their rule depended on knowing where every clan stood, who owed loyalty, who posed a threat. Invisible forces, unclaimed allegiances, and forbidden rights were not just dangerous, they were intolerable. The traveler reached a weathered milestone stone along the road. Its carved characters had faded, but he recognized enough to know it once marked the boundary of a territory under direct shogunate jurisdiction. Here, the official decrees of the Tokugawa were enforced strictly, leaving no room for independent warrior sections. He touched the stone, imagining the patrols that once walked this path. Samurai in the shogunate's service, armor lacquered black, eyes trained to notice the smallest sign of rebellion. These men belonged to a system built on order. A system that could not accept an unnamed clan acting outside the chain of command. It was in this climate of tension that the shogun's edict was first drafted. The earliest version, preserved only in fragments, forbade non-sanctioned warrior cults practicing esoteric discipline beyond the knowledge of the bakufu. The language was vague, but its intention clear. No clan was to operate outside the government's hierarchical control. No ritual, no doctrine, no martial discipline could exist without shogunate approval. Yet the hidden clan had existed long before approval mattered. They had carved their own path, one that paid no homage to government, creed, or clan lineage. That alone made them subversive. But it was their ability to influence outcomes without leaving a trace that made them dangerous. The traveler continued down the road as the sun dipped behind clouds, casting long shadows that stretched like dark brushstrokes across the ground. He recalled a passage from a mid-Edo political report, written by an official who claimed to have witnessed one of the clan's interventions. They do not serve the emperor, nor the shogun, nor any earthly authority. They serve only their unknown purpose. This makes them unpredictable. And unpredictable men are the seeds of chaos. Chaos. The shogunate feared it more than any enemy army. When lords clashed, the shogunate could intervene. When ronin grew restless, officials could suppress them. But how does one control a force that leaves no name, no signature, no motive? Rumor grew that certain daimyo had attempted to secretly gain the clan's favor. A whispered alliance here. An offering made in secrecy there. Nothing overt, but enough to raise suspicion. The shogunate began to believe the clan was being used as a political weapon. Whether this was true or not didn't matter. Perception was enough to ignite fear. The edict strengthened. It condemned shadow sections. It ordered the arrest of warriors who mask identity through forbidden rites. It granted officials permission to dismantle any training ground suspected of teaching unapproved martial practices. Some scholars believed the forbidden dojo the traveler had seen was destroyed after this edict. Others suggested the clan burned it themselves, anticipating the shogunate's approach. Either way, the timing was no coincidence. The traveler reached a small stone bridge spanning a quiet stream. The bridge was old, older than most structures in this region, but beneath one stone arch he spotted faint carvings. Symbols scratched hurriedly, almost in defiance of being erased. The clan had passed here. The grain of the stone, the angle of the carving, the weathering. It all spoke of a message left in haste. Perhaps as a warning. Perhaps as a final mark before retreating deeper into the mountains. He crouched beside the stream, letting his fingers trail in the cold water. The shogun's edict was not just a legal decree. It was a declaration of hostility. An invisible war had begun. One fought not with armies, but with surveillance, suspicion, and silence. Reports from the period described sudden disappearances of individuals suspected of belonging to unsanctioned cults. Some were arrested quietly. Others simply vanished. A few were found dead in forests, their deaths attributed to bandits or wild animals. Explanations too convenient to believe. But the clan did not retaliate openly. Instead, their sightings dwindled. Their symbols became rarer. Their influence faded from official chronicles. It was as though the edict had driven them back into the shadows so deeply that even the shogunate could no longer detect them. Yet the absence felt too intentional. The traveler sensed that the clan's retreat was not defeat. It was adaptation. They knew visibility had become a threat. They understood the weight of power shifting in the land. And so, rather than confront the shogunate, they did what they had always done. They vanished before others even realized the moment had come. Still, the shogun's warning lingered. It echoed in the air of this ancient road, in the stone markings half scraped away, in the historical records too vague to trust yet too specific to ignore. The warning had painted the clan as a threat to national order, an ungovernable force that could not be allowed to exist. But what frightened the shogunate most was not the clan's secrecy. It was their purpose. No lord, no general, no official ever discovered what the clan truly sought. And anything with unknown motives was an enemy of stability. The traveler rose slowly, looking down the winding road ahead. He understood now how the clan became hunted, not because of violence but because of silence. Not because they disrupted order, but because they disrupted certainty. And certainty was the foundation of the Tokugawa rule. What he did not yet know, what he would discover soon, was that disappearance did not mean destruction. The clan had not been erased by the edict. They had only begun to hide more deeply, and in that deeper darkness, something far more mysterious awaited. The traveler left the shogunate road behind, stepping into regions where official authority had always struggled to take root. As he descended into the lowlands, the formal architecture of power faded, replaced by crooked wooden houses, narrow dirt paths, and rice paddies reflecting the gray afternoon sky. This was rural Japan, the cradle of myths, the keeper of old fears, and the one place where history's erasures never truly vanished. Here, stories lived longer than governments, and stories of the hidden clan lingered like smoke no wind could disperse. The traveler entered a small village nestled at the foot of rolling hills. Children paused from their games to watch him with wide, curious eyes. Old women whispered behind sleeves. Men carrying bundles of firewood narrowed their gaze, not in hostility but in caution. Outsiders were rare here, outsiders asking questions even rarer. He bowed politely and made his way toward the communal well, where an elderly man sat on an overturned bucket sharpening a rusted knife. The man looked up, his eyes clouded yet sharp with memory. The traveler asked gently if the village kept tales of warrior spirits, or strange visitors in the night. The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he tapped his knife against the bucket, each metallic click spaced precisely as if counting unseen beats. Then he nodded toward the hills. "The ghosts live there," he murmured. "Always have." The traveler did not dismiss the word. Rural Japan often used ghosts to describe forces not entirely supernatural. Warriors who moved like spirits, monks who vanished into fog, strangers who passed silently through villages without leaving a footprint. Such figures appeared in centuries of folklore. He thanked the old man and followed the path leading out of the village. Soon the houses thinned, giving way to forests dotted with shrines and weathered statues of protective kami. Offerings of rice and coins lay at their feet, fresh, deliberate, as though villagers still prayed fervently for protection from something they dared not name. The path wound upward to a cluster of abandoned huts. Their roofs sagged, their walls crumbled, and wind wailed through empty windows like a voice denied for too long. These structures had belonged to woodcutters who vanished decades earlier, disappearances dismissed officially as accidents or wild animal attacks. But villagers whispered another explanation. Something had watched those men, waited for them, approached them only when the moon was thin. The traveler stepped carefully between the ruined huts. The earth felt disturbed, as though dozens of feet had tread here long after the inhabitants were gone. In one hut, he found an old futon overturned, the floor beneath it scratched by something sharp. Not claws, but blades drawn with controlled pressure. He crouched, tracing the marks. They formed no pattern he recognized, but their precision was human, not animal. Someone had been here, someone trained. A faint rustle slipped through the trees behind him. He rose slowly, every sense sharpened. For a moment he glimpsed a figure small, hunched, wearing the loose robes of a monk or hermit, watching him from behind a cluster of bamboo. The figure's head tilted slightly, as though assessing him. But the moment the traveler blinked, the figure was gone. He continued uphill, leaving the ruins behind. The forest thickened, the air growing cooler. Soon he reached a wide field, an open meadow bathed in pale sunlight filtering through drifting clouds. At its center stood an ancient cedar tree, massive and contorted by centuries of wind. Strips of white paper fluttered from its branches. Shimenawa, sacred ropes marking the tree as holy. Villagers believed spirits dwelled within ancient cedars. But this tree held a different story. Under its gnarled roots lay a stone altar, cracked and overgrown but unmistakably shaped by human hands. The traveler approached carefully. Offerings lay scattered across the altar. Bowls of rice, a wooden flute, dried flowers, even a child's carved toy. Someone, perhaps many someones, had been coming here. He knelt and touched the altar. Its surface felt cold but pulsed faintly beneath his fingertips, as though absorbing centuries of whispered pleas. This altar appeared in one of the old folktales he had studied, a tale of faceless warriors emerging from mist to protect a traveling merchant lost in the hills. When bandits ambushed him, the silent figures intervened, dispatching the attackers with impossible speed. The merchant followed them to this clearing, hoping to thank them. But when he blinked, only the cedar tree remained. The warriors had vanished. The villagers told this story as proof that benevolent spirits guarded the region. But the traveler knew better. These were not spirits. They were members of the hidden clan passing through, bound by a creed that demanded silence, anonymity, and purpose. Their appearance in folktales was not proof of supernatural origin but evidence of how deeply they influenced local memory. The traveler stood and wandered further into the meadow. Here he found strange formations, circles of flattened grass that looked as though people had stood in rigid formation night after night, training beneath the moonlight. Perhaps they had used the field for ritual practice. Perhaps they had gathered here before moving silently through the villages to observe, intervene, or protect. Not all stories painted them as guardians. Some spoke of faceless men punishing those who broke community harmony. A drunk who beat his wife disappeared one night. A man who cheated farmers during harvest vanished after bragging about his deception. Instead of fear, villagers spoke of these disappearances with quiet acceptance, even gratitude. The clan served a balance the villagers instinctively understood. Justice delivered without words, without courts, without witnesses. The traveler wandered to the far edge of the field, where the forest resumed its upward climb. There he found an ancient footpath barely visible beneath roots and fallen leaves. According to rural legend, this path led to the place where no echo returns. A chilling name. He ascended. The forest grew unnaturally still. No birds, no insects, only the sound of his own breath, thick in the quiet. After some time he reached a narrow ravine, its entrance marked by stones carved with symbols, circles intersected by diagonal lines. The clan's mark, dozens of them. Some old, worn smooth by wind, others fresh. Too fresh. He inhaled sharply. Someone had been here recently. Someone who still used these symbols not as historical relics but as living signs. The legends of faceless guardians, silent watchers, and phantom protectors were not the inventions of frightened villagers. They were sightings, real encounters, glimpses of a clan that had vanished from official history but not from the world. The traveler felt a shiver ripple through him as he stepped deeper into the ravine. The further he walked, the louder his heartbeat seemed to echo, though oddly, the sound did not bounce against the stone walls. No echo, just as the legend described. He stopped abruptly. Ahead, on a ridge overlooking the ravine, stood a figure. Tall, motionless, cloaked in black, face obscured by a mask not unlike the charred one he had found at the shrine. The figure did not move, did not speak, did not breathe visibly. The traveler took a slow step forward. The masked figure turned, not aggressively, but deliberately, and slipped behind the rocks with a fluid grace no ordinary human could replicate. Gone. The traveler stood frozen, breath caught somewhere between awe and dread. The clan's presence in the villages was not merely historical. It was current. The ghosts of rural lore were not ghosts at all. They were watching, still watching, just as they had watched for centuries. And now they had noticed him. The traveler's pulse gradually steadied as he pushed deeper into the ravine, though the image of the masked figure lingered behind his eyes like an imprint left by lightning. The air shifted as he walked, growing colder, heavier, filled with a tension that felt older than memory itself. He followed a winding trail that rose toward a ridge, where the forest thinned and the land opened into a rocky plateau overlooking the valley below. There, half buried among the stones, he spotted something glinting faintly beneath the dull afternoon light. A blade, or rather what remained of one. It jutted from the earth like a shard of moonlight frozen in time. The traveler knelt slowly, brushing away soil and brittle leaves. What he uncovered was unlike any weapon he had ever seen. The metal was pristine, untouched by rust despite centuries of exposure. Its edge glimmered with unnatural sharpness. Yet the blade was broken halfway down its length, snapped cleanly, as if by force beyond normal combat. He lifted the fragment, expecting the weight of old iron. Instead, it felt strangely balanced, light yet solid, as though forged with a technique lost to modern smiths. The tang bore no smith's signature, no crest, no family mark. A katana without a maker was unheard of. Every swordsmith took pride in their work, leaving behind a legacy etched in steel. But this blade carried a different legacy. Inside the exposed hollow of the hilt, nearly invisible unless tilted precisely toward the fading sun, lay a series of tiny, etched symbols. The same nameless emblem of the hidden clan. The traveler's breath caught. Here, in his hands, was material proof, undeniable, irreducible, of the clan's existence. Not folklore, not unreliable rumor. A weapon forged by hands that belonged to a people who erased themselves from history. He ran his thumb gently over the etched lines. They were not decorative. They formed a sequence, a code, a message, something personal, perhaps ceremonial. The symbols matched none of the writing systems of the era. They belonged only to the clan. He recalled an obscure passage from the notes of a 17th-century sword scholar who described a phantom blade used by a warrior who moved without sound. The scholar wrote that the weapon had a glow not of metal, but of intention. He believed the blade had been constructed using a long-lost forging technique involving folded layers of steel tempered under extreme conditions. Techniques passed through only a single family line before disappearing entirely. What if those techniques had been preserved not by a family line, but by a nameless clan hidden from the world? As the traveler studied the blade, he noticed something else. The break was too clean, too symmetrical. No ordinary strike could have caused such a fracture. It looked almost ceremonial, as if the sword had been intentionally broken, perhaps during a ritual, or to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. He stood and looked around the plateau. There were stone pillars scattered in irregular patterns, some broken, others eroded into stumps. But near the center lay a long, flat stone slab, marked by weathered grooves. These grooves aligned perfectly with the length of the blade fragment, like a stand where weapons had once rested in ceremony or instruction. This plateau had been a gathering place, a place where warriors stood in formation with swords like this one. The traveler closed his eyes, imagining it. Cloaked figures in black, masks concealing their faces, blades gleaming in the moonlight, their breath slow and synchronized. Perhaps the clan once practiced here, testing the edge of their swords, performing rites, or preparing for missions no one else would ever know. A gust of wind swept through, cold and sudden, carrying with it a faint sound, like metal striking stone. He whipped around, clutching the blade fragment tighter. The sound echoed again, this time closer. Deliberate, not an accident, not nature. He stepped cautiously toward the sound, weaving between broken pillars until he reached a cluster of rocks forming a natural alcove. Inside lay a small cavity, half concealed by moss. Against the wall rested something wrapped in decayed cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. A sheath, black lacquer, cracked and peeling, but unmistakably crafted with precision. Though the sword inside it was long gone, the sheath still radiated artistry. Intricate lines had been carved beneath the lacquer, faint but following the same surreal geometry as the symbols etched into the blade. This was no ordinary katana scabbard. It was ceremonial, perhaps belonging to a clan elder or elite operative. As he examined it, something inside the hollow casing rattled softly. He tilted it. A small metal bead rolled into his palm. It was round, polished smooth, etched with a single diagonal line. Token. A rite marker. An identity-less identification. Many clans had such tokens to signify rank or achievement, but they bore crests, names, or motifs. This one bore nothing but the anonymous slash of the hidden clan symbol. A mark that meant everything to the clan and nothing to outsiders. The traveler stood, holding the fragment, sheath, and token. All relics of a clan that had left no history behind except what they permitted to remain. He felt the weight of realization. The clan did not simply fight battles or intervene in political conflicts. They made their own weapons, their own codes, their own symbols, their own rituals. Their entire existence had been self-contained, woven into secrecy so tightly that the world outside remained blind to it. The wind shifted again, but this time it carried a whisper of movement behind him. He turned sharply. A shadow slid between the trees. Not fast, not threatening, but watching. A presence that flickered like smoke, impossible to pinpoint. The traveler stepped toward the trees, but the shadow retreated deeper into the forest. Not fleeing, guiding, as if urging him to follow the trail further, to uncover something more significant than a broken blade or an abandoned sheath. He hesitated, but only for a moment. He tucked the relics carefully into his pack and stepped toward the darkness beneath the trees. Each footfall sank into the soft earth, muffled by layers of fallen leaves. The forest ahead felt charged with history, alive with the memory of warriors who once sharpened their steel and their discipline beneath its canopy. The blade had been the first tangible sign. But what waited ahead? Proof of the scholar who vanished? Evidence of the rites that shaped the clan? Or perhaps something far more unsettling? A sign that the clan still existed, still watched, still judged, still chose. And now they had chosen to reveal this sword to him, not by accident, but by intention. The forest thickened again as the traveler followed the fading outline of the shadow that had retreated deeper into the trees. Though he could no longer see the figure, a subtle pull, a sense of direction guided not by sight but by instinct, urged him forward. The air grew colder, the canopy darker, and the hush around him deepened into something like reverence. It was in this stillness that the traveler began to remember the story that had first set him on this path. The story of a man who tried to uncover what the world had forgotten. The Magiera scholar. His name had been preserved only in one surviving letter, but his obsession was carved into every fragile page of his research. He had lived at a time when Japan was changing rapidly, abandoning feudal ways for factories and Western ideas. Old traditions died in silence, and the stories of the mountains, stories of clans without names, of warriors without crests, were dismissed as superstition. But the scholar refused to let them fade. He traveled across the country gathering tales from villages, copying inscriptions from ruined temples, sketching symbols found in forgotten shrines. His notes were feverish, fragmented, impossible to fully decipher, but they formed the most complete investigation ever attempted into the hidden clan. And then, days before he planned to publish his findings, he vanished. The traveler pushed aside a curtain of branches and entered a clearing. At its center stood a small abandoned hermitage, wooden walls warped by time, its roof sagging under years of snow and storms. But the structure remained intact enough to suggest that someone had once cared for it. Perhaps the scholar, perhaps someone else. The traveler stepped inside. Dust and silence greeted him. Cobwebs draped the ceiling like forgotten banners. Torn scraps of paper littered the floor, pages long emptied of their ink by water and insects. He bent down and picked up one fragment. The fibers were old, brittle, but on it, faintly visible even under grime, was a single symbol. The clan's emblem. He felt his breath catch. This hermitage wasn't just a random ruin. It was a place the scholar had found, perhaps even lived in, while chasing the truth that eventually consumed him. A low shelf against the wall held what remained of his tools. A cracked inkwell, a brush hardened into uselessness, and a small wooden box sealed with a rusted latch. The traveler gently pried it open. Inside were three things: a folded cloth, a bone-white tablet with strange markings, and a journal. The cloth unwrapped to reveal a lacquered wooden strip, carved with diagonal strokes that matched those seen in clan relics. A charm for protection, perhaps, or a key to a ritual. The tablet was heavier than expected, inscribed with symbols unlike any written language. Not decorative, informational, instructional, perhaps a fragment of the clan's own teachings. But it was the journal that made the traveler's hands tremble. Its leather cover was worn, its pages yellowed, but its contents remained intact. He opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was frantic, slanted, filled with urgency. Dates scribbled in the margins. Names of villages crossed out. Arrows pointing to symbols. Descriptions of encounters. One passage caught his eye. I have seen them. Not a vision, not a ghost. A man moving without sound beneath the cedars. A mask of black lacquer. A blade with no signature. They are real. I am close. Another page was stained, as though water or tears had blurred the ink. They know I am searching. I feel them before I see them. Their presence follows me like a second shadow. Yet I am not afraid, only awed. The journal grew more unsettling as he flipped through. I found a shrine marking their rite of passage. Bones arranged in a circle, offerings untouched by time. What purpose drives a clan to erase themselves? Then, I believe they exist still, not as soldiers, but as guardians of an idea too powerful for the world to wield carelessly. And finally, near the last pages, if you are reading this, know that I followed them willingly. The last entry was dated 3 days before he vanished. No conclusion, no farewell, just a sentence written with trembling strokes. They have allowed me to see what others are forbidden to know. Aloud, the word echoed through the traveler's mind like a distant bell. Had the scholar been taken, initiated, silenced, or had he been welcomed into the shadows? He closed the journal and stood, the dim light filtering through cracks in the roof illuminating his thoughts. The scholar had chased the clan with obsessive devotion, yet the tone of his final pages shifted. Not fear, but surrender. As though he had found something that answered every question he had ever asked. A soft thud sounded behind him. The traveler spun, heart pounding. A loose sheet of paper had fallen from the rafters, drifting to the floor like a dying leaf. He picked it up. The ink was darker and fresher than the journal's entries. This page had been written last. In precise handwriting, "Do not follow where I have gone unless they choose you." The traveler exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling on him. The scholar had not fled. He had not been abducted. He had crossed a boundary, one drawn not by force but by intention. Perhaps the clan had shown him something that demanded a sacrifice. Perhaps they had revealed truths that reshaped his purpose entirely. A gust of wind rattled the hermitage walls, blowing dust into the air. The traveler stepped outside, clutching the journal tightly. The forest felt different now, as though he carried a piece of the clan's hidden knowledge with him. He walked toward the edge of the clearing and found an old stone marker half buried beneath roots. It bore the clan symbol, and beneath it, a newer carving. A single line running downward. A sign meaning chosen. The scholar had left it, or someone had left it for him. Either way, the traveler understood something profound. The clan revealed themselves only when they wished. Not to those who sought power, not to those seeking glory, but to those whose purpose aligned with theirs. He felt the weight of eyes on him again, watching silently from the forest. Not threatening, evaluating. He tucked the journal safely into his pack, bowed respectfully toward the trees, and continued forward. The scholar's trail was no longer a mystery. It was an invitation, one the clan had extended before. One they were extending again. The traveler stepped into the forest shadows with a new understanding. He was not merely uncovering the clan's past. He was being measured by it. And somewhere ahead, in the deep silence of the mountains, waited the next revelation. One that would draw him into the clan's deepest, most forbidden rituals. The forest grew darker as the traveler pressed onward, guided not by landmarks but by a quiet pull. A pulse from the earth itself, or perhaps from the journal tucked in his pack. The words of the vanished scholar swirled through his mind. They have allowed me to see what others are forbidden to know. Allowed, as if the clan acted not through impulse or threat, but through deliberate selection. The trees spread apart, forming a natural archway that led into a narrow gorge. The traveler's steps echoed faintly as he moved through it. The walls rose sharply on either side, streaked with moss and age. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, carrying a scent of damp stone and something else. Something metallic, like old blood long dried. The gorge opened into a hidden hollow, and there he saw them, bone pillars, tall, pale, and weathered into strange, curling shapes. Not human bones. Larger, elongated, animal remains perhaps. Yet they were arranged with precision, forming a circle around a flat clearing at the hollow's center. Wind moaned through their hollow centers, creating an eerie harmony that felt almost intentional. These structures were not random remnants of animals. They were part of a ritual space. The traveler stepped forward cautiously. The ground beneath him felt different, softer, almost cushioned by centuries of undisturbed earth. His breath fogged in the cold air. The hollow was sheltered from sunlight, lit only by thin shafts of light breaking through cracks high above him. He approached one of the bone pillars. Its surface was etched with symbols, layered, spiraling, carved so deeply they seemed burned into the bone itself. He traced the grooves with his fingertips. Some symbols he recognized. The clan's diagonal strokes, their circles intersecting emptiness. But others were new, sharp, angular marks that reminded him of talismans used by ancient mountain priests. This place was not a battlefield. It was sacred and dangerous. He turned toward the center of the hollow, where a stone basin rested atop a pedestal carved into the shape of intertwined limbs. The basin was filled with water so still it reflected him perfectly, even the slightest detail of his face, though the air around him rippled with chill. He leaned closer. Only then did he see it. In the reflection, he was not alone. A masked figure stood behind him. He spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Only bone pillars and shadows. He exhaled shakily and looked back at the basin. The reflection showed only himself now. A test? A warning? Or merely his mind awakening to the intensity of this place? He stepped away and surveyed the hollow more carefully. Near the edge of the circle lay a series of stone slabs arranged in a crescent. Each slab bore the same deep carvings, ritual instructions perhaps, or invocations. He began to read the symbols slowly, translating what little he knew from the scholar's notes. The first symbol represented breath, the second, shadow, the third, sacrifice, the fourth, memory, the fifth, emptiness, the sixth was unknown. Yet it appeared repeatedly at the end of every sequence. Its meaning eluded him, though it felt familiar somehow, like a word he had heard in childhood but forgotten. He brushed his fingers over the last slab. This carving was deeper than the others, almost angry. The grooves jagged, raw. The moment he touched it, the wind shifted. Low humming filled the hollow, rising through the bone pillars in a resonant chorus. Each pillar vibrated slightly, amplifying the sound like a lattice of flutes played by the unseen. The traveler stepped back, startled. The humming grew louder, then stopped. A silence followed, a heavy, expectant silence. And then he understood. This was a ritual space for the clan's most secret ceremonies. Not training, not initiation, communion. This was where the clan spoke to their ancestors. Not verbally, but through action, breath, and blood. He knelt at the center, imagining the scene centuries ago. Warriors in black robes, faces hidden behind lacquered masks, gathered at the edges of the circle. The eldest members standing closest to the basin, chanting in tones so low they merged with the hum of the pillars. In his mind he saw an initiate being led into the hollow. Eyes wide, breath controlled, body trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge of what was about to happen. The rite of unmaking had prepared them. This ritual completed them. The initiate would kneel before the stone basin. The master would dip a blade, perhaps the same type of blade whose fragment the traveler carried, into the still water. The water would ripple, reflecting the initiate's face splintering into distorted images. The master would then trace the clan's symbol onto the initiate's chest, not with ink, but with the cold edge of the blade. Not deep enough to draw blood, but enough to shock the spirit awake. Only then would the chanting rise. The pillars would hum, the hollow would come alive, and the initiate, overwhelmed by sound, movement, and the weight of ancestral presence, would surrender the last remnants of their former self. The clan believed that in this moment, when the mind was emptied, the breath controlled, the ego dissolved, the spirits of previous clan members passed into the initiate. Not literally, symbolically, philosophically, their teachings became memory, their discipline became instinct. The initiate was no longer a single person. They were a continuation of all who came before, a living archive of silence. The traveler stood, breathing deeply. A sense of awe and dread tangled within him. This hollow was not haunted, it was alive with ritual history. The bones, the basin, the carvings, they were not remnants. They were instructions, warnings, and invitations. He looked again at the mysterious sixth symbol. It seemed almost like a door, or a boundary, or a threshold meant to be crossed only once. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the hollow seemed to whisper. Not in words, but in sensations. Cold air brushing his skin, faint footsteps circling him, the vibration of bone beneath earth. Was he imagining it? Or was the clan testing him? He opened his eyes slowly. Something had changed. On the far side of the hollow, between two bone pillars, lay an object wrapped in old cloth. It had not been there moments ago. He approached it cautiously, lifting the cloth. Inside was a small stone tablet. New, not eroded, not ancient, freshly carved. The same sequences of symbols lined its surface, but this one included a translation. Beneath the sixth symbol were 3 characters he could read from his studies. They formed a single word. Surrender. The breath left his lungs. The clan had spoken. This hollow was not only a remnant of ancient rituals, it was still being used, still guarded, still alive. He looked up toward the pillars, half expecting a masked figure to emerge. No one came, but he no longer felt alone. The tablet, the presence, the silence. It all pointed toward a single truth. The boundary between observer and participant was thinning. The clan had allowed him to enter this place. The question was why, and what would happen if he continued crossing thresholds meant for warriors who chose to abandon their names, their identities, and their lives. He stood at the center of the hollow, the stone tablet heavy in his hands. The sixth symbol pulsed in his thoughts. Surrender, not to death, not to fear, but to the path. The path the scholar had taken. The path the clan had walked for centuries. And a path the traveler now felt pulling him toward its darkest, deepest secret. One he was no longer sure he had the strength or the choice to refuse. The traveler left the hollow of bone pillars reluctantly, the weight of the stone tablet still lingering like a phantom against his palm even after he tucked it safely away. But as he walked, the forest shifted again, its character changing in subtle but unmistakable ways. The oppressive heaviness of ritual spaces gave way to something sharper, cleaner, more deliberate. The trees thinned, the ground grew flatter, and patterns emerged in the landscape. Symmetry carved by human intention, not nature. The next revelation was not spiritual. It was practical, and in some ways even stranger. For the stories that painted the hidden clan as supernatural beings, spirits that glided through moonlight, shadows that dissolved into mist, were not entirely the product of imagination. Their silence, their swiftness, their vanishing acts, all of it had a foundation in reality. Weapons, rituals, and discipline shaped their identity. But something else shaped their myth. Techniques. Techniques so precise, so psychological, so far ahead of their time that villagers mistook them for magic. The traveler emerged into a clearing unlike any he had seen. Here, the ground was packed into a perfect circle, bordered by wooden stakes long rotted at their bases. This had once been a training ring, not for swordsmanship but for movement itself. The traveler could almost see the faint impressions of feet tracing arcs in the dirt, grooves worn deeper in places where turns had been practiced thousands of times. He stepped into the ring. A quiet breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly metallic. As he stood there, a sense of pattern washed over him. This was not a battlefield. It was a stage for learning how to disappear. The clan's methods of vanishing were not mystical tricks. They were masterful illusions, engineered through an understanding of human perception. The first secret was sound. Ordinary warriors revealed themselves with every movement. The rustle of clothing, the scuff of feet, the clink of metal. But the hidden clan trained until their steps became weightless. They learned to roll their feet like cats, toes first, then the outer edge, then the heel, each shift anchored in breath control. They walked in the blind spots of sound, synchronizing their footsteps with wind gusts, crackling fires, or the chirping of nocturnal insects. Silence wasn't a byproduct of skill. It was a science. The traveler knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. The earth was firm, perfect for transmitting vibrations. The clan would have used this, learning to sense approaching footsteps through subtle tremors, allowing them to evade detection long before they were seen. He rose and examined the trees surrounding the clearing. The trunks bore shallow cuts, spaced evenly in vertical lines. These were climbing marks, evidence of a training technique that allowed warriors to scale trees faster than a man could draw breath. Once elevated, they mastered the art of stillness. So still, in fact, that villagers looking upward saw only branches swaying gently in the breeze. The second secret was shadow discipline. It wasn't sorcery, it was timing. The clan studied moon cycles, cloud movements, and forest density. They learned how to place themselves exactly where shadows thickened, how to halt motion at the instant a torch sputtered, how to blend into the jagged silhouette of a broken wall. Their clothing wasn't simply black. It was textured with dull patterns that disrupted outlines, turning a person into a knot of darkness. No, I could easily distinguish. They did not vanish. They became part of the environment. The traveler walked toward the far edge of the clearing, where a series of carved stones formed a narrow corridor. He recognized these from sketches in the scholar's notes. The path of echoes. The clan used it to practice misdirection. Sound bounced strangely between the stones, splitting and scattering in unpredictable ways. A warrior could throw a pebble and make it sound as if it had landed behind an enemy instead of to their side. A whisper could travel in reverse. A footstep could appear to come from a distance when the person was already near. The third secret was psychological manipulation. Their silence wasn't just stealth, it was a weapon of fear. Bandits and soldiers who survived encounters with the clan spoke of an unbearable tension that preceded them. A sense of being watched by something that moved faster than thought. Their minds filled the silence with imagined horrors, giving the clan an advantage before a single strike was made. The clan's warriors trained in controlling their own expressions, breath, posture. They learned to stand so still that observers doubted their own senses. They approached targets from angles the human brain was least prepared to register, from behind slightly to the left where peripheral vision falters. Fear did half the work for them. The traveler touched one of the carved stones. Its surface was polished smooth from generations of hands. He imagined a young initiate standing between these stones while masters circled silently, creating illusions meant to disorient them. The initiate learned not to trust their ears or eyes, only their breath and intention. And when mastered, these techniques coalesced into something indistinguishable from the supernatural. Villagers claimed they saw faceless warriors appear at the edge of firelight, then vanish without footstep or rustle. They told stories of shadows that split into two, then rejoined, of silhouettes standing beneath moonlight that cast no shadow. None of this was magic, but the result felt magical. The traveler walked back to the center of the clearing. He could almost feel the presence of past warriors practicing around him, each step deliberate, each breath measured, each motion designed to blur the boundary between body and environment. Then he sensed something else. A shift behind him. Soft, controlled, perfect. He froze. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, not by accident, but with purpose. It remained still long enough to be noticed, then faded back into the trees with a precision that made the traveler's heart stutter. Everything he had just learned, the techniques of silence, misdirection, shadow mastery, had not died with the clan. Someone had mastered them still. Someone had followed him here, not to harm him, but to observe, to measure, to decide. The clearing, once merely a relic of ancient training, now felt alive again. Its purpose renewed, its breath awakened. The traveler realized with a shiver. He was no longer studying the clan's methods. He was experiencing them. And whatever waited beyond this clearing would not simply reveal the truth behind the clan's abilities. It would reveal why they had chosen to watch him. Night fell with a suddenness that felt almost orchestrated. One moment the traveler stood within the training clearing beneath fading daylight. The next, a blanket of darkness unfurled across the sky, swallowing the last embers of twilight. No stars pierced the canopy overhead. No moon bathed the trees. Only a strange, muted glow clung to the edges of things, as though the darkness itself had learned to cast its own light. He inhaled slowly, sensing a shift not just in the forest, but in time itself. For what he was about to uncover was not just a story of warriors. It was a legend, a night so extraordinary, so impossible, that even those who documented it questioned their own memory. The night of the silent sunrise. He had read the tale before. Villagers whispered fragments. Scholars dismissed it. Soldiers feared it. And preserved within rare, brittle texts were accounts so extraordinary they bordered on myth. But here, walking through the dim-lit forest, the traveler felt the past breathing at his neck, urging him to witness the truth hidden beneath centuries of fear and awe. The trees parted into a vast plateau overlooking a wide expanse of land. Grasses bowed gently from a wind that had no source. The ground beneath him seemed to hum faintly, as though remembering footsteps long vanished. It was here that the legendary event had taken place. Centuries ago, this plateau had been the staging ground for an invading army, a ruthless force descending from the northern territories, armed with steel, fire, and ambition. Their leader, a warlord known for brutality, sought to overthrow the region by dawn. His men were confident, his horses restless. His commanders assured him victory before sunrise. But the invaders never expected what awaited them. The traveler stepped forward, listening to the wind whisper through the grass. As he scanned the dark horizon, he felt something shift, an impression, a memory rising from the soil itself. Suddenly, in the stillness of night, the plateau seemed to transform. The traveler's mind filled with the imagery of that forgotten battlefield. He could almost hear it, the rustle of armor, the creak of wooden wheels, the low murmur of soldiers awaiting their orders. Torches glowed like crawling fireflies against the dark, illuminating the determined faces of thousands preparing for a night assault. The invading army planned to strike without warning, using the cover of darkness to overwhelm the smaller defending forces hidden somewhere beyond the ridges. The traveler closed his eyes, imagining the invaders' confidence. Then he imagined how quickly it shattered. It began with a chill in the air, a strange movement in the mist. One soldier later described it as the moment the night inhaled. The torches dimmed, not extinguished, but smothered by something unseen. Horses bucked, nostrils flaring, hooves striking the earth in panic. Commanders barked orders, confused by the sudden unease sweeping through their ranks. And then the mist rose, not a drifting fog, but a wall thick, cold, swirling with an unnatural stillness. It enveloped the army in a shroud of pale blue-white haze. Men stumbled, torches sputtered. The warlord shouted for formation, but the mist swallowed sound as easily as it swallowed light. The first scream came from the far left flank. It was brief, clipped, and then silence. The traveler opened his eyes, his breath fogged in the air, not from cold, but from something else, something that made the forest feel suddenly alive with memory. He took another step across the plateau. The mist clung low to the ground tonight, curling around his ankles like cautious fingers. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision. He felt the hairs on his arms rise, not from fear, but recognition. The air felt charged, as if echoing the remarkable event that once occurred here. Accounts of the battle were sparse. Only a handful of soldiers survived. Men who returned with eyes hollow, unable to articulate what they'd seen. Their words, collected by scribes and buried in old temples, painted a fragmented but haunting picture. The invaders tried to regroup, but the mist moved with intelligence. It divided them, disoriented them, cut sound into strange, directionless echoes. It was in this disorienting haze that the hidden clan emerged. Not as an army, not as rescuers, not as assassins, as phantoms, figures cloaked in black, faces covered with expressionless masks, movements so silent they seemed more illusion than flesh. They did not march. They did not charge. They flowed like shadows under moonlight, weaving between soldiers who saw only glimpses of them. Just enough to terrify, never enough to comprehend. One survivor described it. They were not men. They were absence shaped into human form. The traveler felt the weight of those words as he reached the center of the plateau. The grass beneath him was oddly flattened in circular patterns, as though something had moved in spirals, hundreds of figures in perfect coordination. He knelt, pressed his hand to the earth. It vibrated faintly, whether from memory or imagination he could not tell. The battle had lasted mere minutes. No cries of agony, no clashes of steel, no thunder of hooves, only silence. A silence so deep that soldiers collapsed from terror before they ever saw a blade. Some dropped their weapons and fled blindly into the night, only to find their paths blocked by figures who never attacked, only watched, forcing them back into the spiraling mist. The clan had not come to slaughter. They had come to stop, to intervene, to prevent an invasion that would have led to years of chaos. But their method was terrifying. The commander's tent was found untouched at dawn. No blood, no signs of struggle, only a single symbol carved into his writing desk. The same diagonal mark the traveler had seen so many times. The warlord's body was never found, and when the mist finally lifted, not a single soldier remained capable of fighting. Some wandered aimlessly, muttering incoherent phrases. Some sat in silence, staring into nothing. Others woke with no memory of the night at all. The invading force disintegrated before sunrise. Hence the name, the Silent Sunrise. No battle, no victory, no defeat, just disappearance. As the traveler stood in the present, the wind picked up, carrying with it a low resonance, like distant chanting or the hum of bone pillars. The plateau seemed to breathe. The mist thickened, and then, a flicker on the far side of the field. A silhouette, tall, still, masked, not threatening, not approaching, simply present. The traveler's heart pounded. He stepped toward it. The figure raised a hand, not in greeting but in warning, and the mist curled upward around the figure's legs, swallowing it whole. When the whiteness thinned, there was nothing left but wind. The traveler exhaled tremblingly. He understood now. The Silent Sunrise was not merely a legendary event. It was a demonstration, a message delivered across time. The hidden clan did not seek glory. They did not seek violence. They sought balance. And when balance was threatened, they intervened, not with bloodshed, but with fear, precision, and a mastery of perception so complete it felt divine. The traveler looked across the empty plateau, heart still racing from the vision of the masked figure. The past was no longer simply something he studied. It was reaching toward him, guiding him, judging him. The scholar had been right. The clan did not vanish. They chose when to be seen. And tonight, for reasons he could not yet understand, they had chosen him. Whatever awaited next would not be an echo of history. It would be an encounter, a test, a revelation, and possibly a crossing into the same silence that once swallowed an entire army before dawn. The traveler descended from the plateau with the heaviness of the Silent Sunrise still clinging to him like fog. The memory of the masked silhouette, its stillness, its warning, its disappearance, burned in his thoughts. But beneath the awe, a quiet dread had begun to form. There was something deeper in the clan's history, something darker than battles fought in silence or warriors who moved like shadows. He felt it in the shifting winds, in the way the forest seemed to observe him, in the tremor of earth beneath old roots. The next truth was not about victories at all. It was about betrayal, and betrayal always left a sharper wound than any blade. The path narrowed into a winding descent between sheer stone walls. The traveler felt as though he were being ushered downward into the heart of some buried memory. A memory the clan had never intended for outsiders to uncover. The air carried a metallic tang. Shadows pooled thickly in the corners of the pass. Even the birds had abandoned this part of the forest, avoiding a silence too heavy for wings to disturb. He emerged into a clearing shaped like a bowl. High rock walls enclosed it, trapping the cold air. Dead leaves carpeted the ground, and something about their arrangement, too scattered, too disturbed, told him this place had once been a battleground, not of armies, but of a clan destroying itself. He walked slowly, scanning the clearing. At first there was nothing unusual, just rock, earth, fallen branches. But then he noticed the markings. Shallow cuts in the stone walls, arranged in patterns that spiraled downward like collapsing logic. Weapons had struck here. Many weapons. Not in training. Not ritualistically. Desperately. The traveler felt a tightening in his chest. This was the site of the clan's great fracture. Even the scholar's notes had only hinted at it, scribbled references to a period known among the few who studied the clan as the Night of Splintering. No dates, no details, just an implication that something terrible had ruptured the unity of the warriors who once moved as a single silent will. He knelt near one of the deeper cuts and brushed his fingers across it. The groove was clean, too deep for mere practice strikes. Swords had clashed here, fast, hard, with intent to kill. A faint whisper of wind echoed through the basin. Not a natural wind, a remembering. He closed his eyes and let the hollow speak its story. The hidden clan, bound by their iron code of silence and self-erasure, had long functioned as a single entity, its members shedding their identities to serve the collective purpose. But within any system built on absolute unity, there was always one inevitable threat: doubt. The first seeds of division took root in the heart of a single warrior, an initiate who, according to fragments of folklore, had risen through the clan with exceptional clarity, skill, and emotional mastery. But he carried within him a flaw the initiation rites could not erase: memory. Where others emerged from their rebirth hollow and obedient, he retained something, a tether weak but persistent, to the self he was supposed to have killed. He began to question. Why was their purpose so obscured? What lay at the true center of their doctrine? Who decided when and where they intervened? And why must their own identities be sacrificed completely? The clan had no tolerance for such thoughts. Doubt threatened harmony. Doubt shattered unity. Doubt invited chaos. The warrior who questioned did not intend rebellion. He sought understanding. But questions in a silent order were louder than shouts. He was confronted privately by the elders, not with punishment, but with a choice: surrender the memory that lingered or be cast out. What happened next blurred into legend. Some said he fled. Others said he refused. A few whispered that the elders attempted to break him through another rite, one harsher, deeper, designed to crush the lingering self. But something went wrong. Whether through resistance or panic or a moment of emotional fracture, the initiate reacted violently. A spark of rebellion ignited in him, alien to the clan's nature yet powerful enough to shatter centuries of stillness. He attacked, not out of ambition, out of fear. Fear of losing his last fragment of identity. And fear is contagious. Other warriors, shaken by his defiance, felt old memories stir, old desires, old names, old wounds. The clan's perfect discipline rippled, buckled, then ruptured altogether. The night of splintering began. The traveler opened his eyes, heart pounding. His mind filled with the imagined chaos of that night. Warriors trained to be silent now screaming inwardly as their foundations cracked. Blades clashing in the darkness. Shadows fighting shadows. Masks shattered. Vows broken. A clan built upon unity tearing itself apart. No witnesses survived outside the clan, but the aftermath was recorded in scars on the walls of this hidden basin. Some grooves were thin and precise sword strikes. Others were rougher, dagger thrusts or grapples slammed against stone. Blood must have soaked the earth. Cries must have filled the hollow, though no story admitted it. For the first time in their history, the clan lost control of itself. The elders, faced with a rebellion born from one man's refusal to surrender the last shred of who he was, made an impossible decision: to purge the clan of every member touched by doubt. The clearing's center held darker earth, a patch that refused to grow grass. Even now, the traveler knelt beside it, feeling the cold seep into his bones. This spot, according to legend, was where the elders enacted the final act of that night. Here, they sealed the fate of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of warriors who once moved with the same breath. Some claim they died fighting. Others say they were disciplined into silence one last time. And some whisper that those who refused surrender vanished, not slain, but exiled into shadow deeper than the clan itself. The traveler stood slowly, feeling the weight of the story tightening around him. The clan had been fractured not by outsiders, not by armies, not by the shogun. By a single question, by a single voice, by a single memory refusing to die. The betrayal had not been of the clan. It had been of their doctrine. The elders rebuilt, purged, and pressed their teachings harder in the years that followed. They doubled their secrecy. They perfected their rites. They eliminated even the possibility of individual will. But the fracture never healed entirely. Some survivors scattered. Some became hermits. A few, according to whispers, carried the rebellious initiate's philosophy into hidden corners of Japan. A splinter clan, roguish, unbound, still practicing the old ways but with purpose twisted. The traveler exhaled. The truth of the clan's downfall was not a clean story of heroism or villainy. It was a tragedy born from the deepest struggle in the human spirit, the struggle between identity and belonging, between self and silence, between who one is and who one is told to become. He took a final look at the scarred basin. The air felt thick with sorrow, but also with warning. The past does not die easily. Neither does betrayal. And somewhere in the mountains, the descendants of both the loyal clan and the splintered one were still watching. Perhaps even watching him. The traveler left the hollow of betrayal with a heaviness he had not felt before. The wind no longer whispered. The forest no longer breathed in rhythm with his steps. Everything around him seemed to grieve quietly, deeply, for a clan torn apart by its own ideals. The night of splintering had not just fractured a warrior order. It had scattered souls. As he climbed a narrow ridge path, the terrain changed. The thick forests gave way to terraces carved into the mountainside. Ancient rice fields long abandoned, their patterns visible only through the outlines of overgrown embankments. Mist curled along the ridges like pale fingers seeking what once lived here. These terraces, according to the scholar's notes, marked one of the places where the survivors fled. Not all warriors perished in the clan's internal collapse. Some escaped into the world, shedding their black masks for new identities. Unlike ghosts in folktales, they became something far quieter, ordinary people. The children of the scattered flame. The traveler descended into a small valley where homes once stood. Now only foundations remained, rectangular stone outlines overtaken by moss and creeping vines. A silence hung in the air, but not the oppressive silence of ritual places. This was the soft, lingering quiet of lives lived without witness. He walked among the ruins with reverence. Here, scattered members had sought refuge after fleeing the annihilation of their clan. Some chose the path of wandering monks. Others disguised themselves as simple farmers. A few became craftsmen, swordsmiths, or herbalists, living unassuming lives in remote communities. They carried their discipline within them, not as a weapon, but as a private inheritance. The traveler paused beside an old stone lantern cracked down the middle. He touched the surface and felt faint engravings beneath the moss. When he cleared it gently, he saw the faint, stylized diagonal line, the clan's mark, disguised within a decorative pattern of falling rain. Hidden in plain sight, even in exile they had left whispers of their lineage. He continued along the stone pathway. In one ruin he found remnants of a workshop. Rusted chisels, a warped anvil, and a half-finished wooden carving buried beneath debris. He brushed away the dust to reveal a miniature figure, a guardian spirit carved with smooth, practiced hands. Its eyes were elongated, its features serene. The craftsmanship was too precise for an ordinary villager. A clan artisan had lived here. In the next ruin he found a shelf carved into the wall. It held the fragments of small clay vessels, medicine jars. A traveling healer perhaps. Someone who once used their knowledge of breathing and herbs to mend, not harm. Every scattered member had adapted their skills to survive among ordinary people. But some traditions they could not relinquish. At the edge of the valley stood a small shrine, humble, wooden, half-collapsed. The traveler ducked beneath the warped torii gate. Within the shrine, a single object remained untouched by time. A folded strip of black cloth, tied in a ceremonial knot. He untied it carefully. Inside lay a small bone whistle, a training tool, used by elders to teach breath control so refined that the sound would disappear into the natural hum of the environment. The bone felt smooth, polished by years of handling. The holes were arranged asymmetrically, producing tones that would confuse an untrained ear. A relic of identity disguised as a simple talisman. The traveler replaced it reverently. As he left the shrine, the mist thickened around him as though the valley exhaled. He felt eyes upon him, not threatening but curious. The sensation grew stronger when he reached a bend in the path overlooking the valley's river. There, perched on a smooth stone as if waiting for him, sat a crane. A lone white crane, motionless, watching him with eyes that felt older than the world. Crane symbolism was common in Japanese folklore, but within the hidden clan, it carried a specific meaning. The crane was the embodiment of quiet endurance, surviving harsh places, traveling great distances, living in balance. It was also the emblem secretly adopted by some members of the scattered survivors. A quiet sign: we lived through fire. We walk still. The crane beat its wings once, twice, then lifted gracefully into the air, disappearing into the mist. The traveler sensed the gesture was not random. It was acknowledgement. He continued along the river, passing under overhanging branches. Ahead, he spotted the remnants of another settlement. This one older, more elaborate. The houses here had been built with precision. The stonework was symmetrical, the lintels carved with geometric patterns. This was no ordinary village. It was a hidden refuge, a place where those who refused to abandon the clan's teachings gathered in secret. Not to preserve war, but to preserve discipline. They trained quietly in the woods, keeping the old breathing techniques alive. They passed their philosophy to their children, not as doctrine but as wisdom. Do not let ego rule your heart. Do not let fear dictate your path. Move with intention. Act with clarity. Protect balance. But hide your light. The children raised in these settlements learned to move silently even during play. They learned how to listen to wind patterns, how to track footprints without being seen, how to meditate under waterfalls until their bodies stopped trembling. They were not warriors, not anymore, but the clan lived through them. The traveler walked into what used to be a central meeting hall. The roof was gone, but the pillars remained, tall, silent guardians. Beneath the fallen beams lay a circular platform of smooth stone. Training ground. He knelt and found fresh footprints, small, light, recent. Not human. A fox or a deer perhaps, but the markings around them told a different story. Parallel scratches, shallow, deliberate. A coded message left behind in a language no scholar had ever deciphered fully. Said, we left, we lived, we learned, we still watch. He swallowed. The scattered clan had not died out. Their descendants lived in pockets across Japan. Quiet monks in remote temples, mountain craftsmen, wandering musicians, swordsmiths whose blades carried no signature, even farmers who rose before dawn to practice breathing patterns passed down through generations. The clan's flame had not extinguished. It had separated into embers, scattered, dimmed, but alive. Alive in the mundane. Alive in the forgotten. Alive in the corners of society that history never noticed. The traveler rose, feeling a strange mix of hope and foreboding. The splintering had not been the end. It had been a transformation. A scattering not of ashes, but of seeds. And those seeds still waited, watched, listened, prepared. He continued along the valley until the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. Somewhere ahead, deeper into the wilderness, remnants of the clan still held onto something greater than survival. Purpose. Purpose that the traveler knew he was drawing closer to with every step. Purpose that the descendants might yet defend, should anyone stray too close to uncovering what the clan had always sought to protect. And now, he was closer than anyone had been in centuries. The traveler continued deeper into the mountains, moving through forests so dense that sunlight rarely touched the ground. Days passed in a blur of silent paths, old hunting trails, stone markers half consumed by moss. The relics of the scattered clan faded with distance, but their presence lingered like the faint warmth of a fire long extinguished. Every step carried him further from the past he could glimpse, and closer to the present he could only suspect. Then, at the edge of a remote valley, he found signs of someone who had followed a similar path a century before him. A narrow footbridge crossed over a stream so clear it reflected the sky like polished glass. On the far side stood a small wooden structure, half shrine, half cottage, its roof sagging yet intact. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The place was silent, abandoned perhaps, but the traveler recognized it instantly. The anthropologist's shelter. In the early 20th century, during Japan's rapid modernization, a researcher had come here. A man who specialized in the study of rural folklore and vanishing traditions. While the world around him embraced factories and telegraphs, he walked into mountains with nothing but notebooks, ink, and an insatiable curiosity about the ways of old Japan. He'd arrived in these valleys seeking chants used during harvest ceremonies, ritual dances believed to call rain, local legends that predated the written word. But what he found was something the world would refuse to believe. The traveler crossed the bridge and stepped into the anthropologist's shelter. Dust coated every surface, but the interior was surprisingly organized. Drawers neatly shut, scrolls arranged in bundles, shelves holding brittle books with pages yellowed from age. A faint smell of ink and time lingered in the air. He moved toward a desk near the window. On it lay a leather journal. Its cover was cracked, but the clasp remained latched. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with sketches, quick, frantic renderings of figures in motion. Warriors? Dancers? The lines blurred, as though the anthropologist had attempted to capture something that moved too quickly for human perception. Under one sketch, a note read, "They move with purpose, not rhythm, but the rhythm of the body is their prayer." The traveler turned the page. More sketches. Figures kneeling. Figures rising. Arms sweeping in arcs that resembled sword forms but without weapons. Movements impossibly fluid, illustrated with arrows showing the direction of motion. But it was the text beside the sketches that seized his breath. These movements resemble accounts from the old clan. Not martial yet precise. Ritualistic. A hidden echo of something older. The anthropologist had found something no one expected. A village that preserved fragments of the clan's rituals. Not consciously, not as warriors upholding a vow, but as ordinary people practicing traditions passed down so many generations they had forgotten their origin. The traveler flipped through the journal quickly now, searching for the detailed notes that the scholar from Meiji times had never managed to record. And he found them. Descriptions of chanting patterns. Meditation postures aligned with mountain winds. Breathing cycles synchronized with the cadence of water dripping into stone basins. The anthropologist wrote, "They say they learned these movements from their ancestors, who learned them from travelers in black. That these travelers never stayed long, never spoke much, but taught through demonstration. They called them mountain listeners. Mountain listeners, a name no textbook had ever recorded. Yet the meaning was clear. remnants of the clan, teaching without revealing. The traveler felt a cold thrill. This was proof the clan had quietly shaped communities even after their fall. He turned another page. More drawings. But these were different. A ring of villagers stood in formation around a fire, their feet positioned deliberately, their arms stiff, their heads bowed. It resembled the rite of unmaking, but gentler, stripped of the harshness of purpose, preserved as cultural ritual rather than spiritual metamorphosis. Beside the drawing, the anthropologist had written, "There is no mention of identity erasure, no talk of becoming shadow. To them, this is simply a way of honoring the ancestors." Yet the steps match the old descriptions too closely to dismiss. The traveler read on. Another entry described an evening in which the anthropologist followed villagers into the forest. They gathered in a clearing lit only by moonlight. There, without drums or instruments, they performed a sequence of movements he had never seen. At times they seemed to vanish when they passed behind trees, not because of magic, but because their bodies compress into shadows. Their footfalls disappear. This is no dance. This is a technique. The word technique was underlined 3 times. The traveler felt the air in the shelter tighten. This was no ordinary discovery. The anthropologist had uncovered a living fragment of the clan's discipline. Camouflaged as tradition, practiced unconsciously, but preserved through muscle memory. Then, abruptly, the journal's tone changed. As the traveler flipped further, he noticed the handwriting become erratic. Lines slanted, ink splotched. Someone watches me. A page later, they stand at the forest edge, always at dusk, always silent. The villagers do not notice. Another, they are not villagers. Their posture is too exact. Their shadow does not shake when the wind moves the branches. The traveler swallowed hard. The researcher had seen them, not descendants, not villagers mimicking old forms. Them, the clan, alive, watching, measuring. The final entries grew increasingly frantic. The villagers say I should leave. They say strangers who see the old rituals too clearly anger the watchers. I found symbols on my door this morning. They were not there last night. Tonight the moon was full. They came closer. And then the last entry, they let me see. God help me, they let me see. The sentence ended abruptly, ink trailing off the page as though the anthropologist had been interrupted mid-stroke. The traveler closed the journal with shaking hands. He looked around the shelter. It was clear the anthropologist never returned. The villagers likely found the deserted cabin and left it untouched out of respect, or fear. The scholar's disappearance had been a mystery for decades. Scholars assumed accident, illness, or misadventure. But the truth was far more complex. The clan had measured him. They had decided. And he had crossed the same threshold the Meiji scholar had crossed before him. The traveler stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, the valley stretching wide and echoing with a silence that felt far too deliberate. He understood now. This was not coincidence. 2 men, separated by decades, both drawn to the clan, both allowed to see, both vanished, and now he himself walked the same path. As he gazed down the valley, a chill wind swept past him, and for the briefest moment, he saw movement in the distant trees. A figure, still, silent, watching. The traveler did not call out. He did not run. He simply nodded. And after a long moment, the figure faded into shadow, leaving behind a path the traveler had no choice but to follow. For the next revelation would not be about history preserved in rituals. It would be about the philosophy that shaped those rituals, and the heart that kept the clan alive even after its world collapsed. The path descended sharply from the anthropologist's shelter, as if leading the traveler not through land, but into the layered interior of an idea. The forest grew denser again, its branches arching overhead like the ribs of a great sleeping creature. Light thinned, sound softened. Even his own footsteps grew subdued, muffled by moss and memory. It felt as though he were entering not a new place, but the mind of the clan itself. The journal's final words echoed in him. They let me see. What had they allowed the anthropologist to see? What did they intend for him to see now? The deeper he went, the more the land changed. Gone were the scattered ruins, the traces of exiles and wanderers. This terrain felt untouched, preserved as if shielded from centuries of storms, invasions, and noise. Roots spiraled like calligraphy. Stones stood in deliberate positions, forming lines that guided the eye toward openings in the forest. Then the world widened. He stepped into a vast, natural amphitheater carved by ancient glaciers. Wide stone terraces formed steps descending toward a still, mirror-like pool at its center. Moss covered the seating stones. Vines draped over the terraces. But the geometry was unmistakable. This had been a gathering place. Not for ritual, not for training, for thought. The philosopher's gallery. He had read only passing references to it. A rumor whispered in a 19th century letter. A brief description in a monk's secret commentary. A scribbled note in the Meiji Scholars' Journal. A place where they taught without teaching. And now he stood before it. The traveler approached the pool. Its water was so clear he could see stones at the bottom, arranged in symmetrical patterns. The air around him felt different. Lighter, charged with the residue of contemplation rather than fear or discipline. He felt as though he were intruding on a conversation that had begun centuries before and had never truly ended. He knelt at the water's edge and waited. Nothing stirred. But then, faintly, like a whisper carried across time, he sensed it. A presence not human but conceptual. The sense that here, the clan had questioned the very essence of existence. Their philosophy was the true secret. Their silence was not merely tactical. Their self-erasure was not merely ritual. Their discipline was not merely martial. Everything they did stemmed from a worldview so refined that it bordered on impossible for ordinary minds to inhabit. He closed his eyes, letting the silence of the amphitheater seep into him. What did the clan believe? That identity was the root of suffering. That ego clouded perception. That the self was an obstacle, not a truth. That clarity came only when the self was dissolved. But beyond this, there was something deeper still. The clan believed that reality itself was a series of obstructed perceptions. That humans lived blindfolded by emotion, memory, fear, and desire. To see the world clearly, to act without hesitation, they had to peel away these layers. Every rite, every discipline, every forbidden practice aimed toward one ultimate state. Absolute presence. A state in which past regrets held no weight. Future worries held no sway. Only the moment remained sharp, perfect, undeniable. And in that state, a warrior could act with purity. Not morality. Not rage. Not duty. Clarity. The traveler opened his eyes, the surface of the pool rippling faintly though no wind blew. He realized the pool's stillness was symbolic. An ideal they sought within themselves. A mind so calm that even the faintest thought would disturb it. He looked up at the terraces. This was not a place where orders were given. It was a place where doubts were confronted. The elders gathered here not to dictate, but to question. They debated in silence, gestures, eye movements, breath patterns replacing speech. Words were considered too imprecise, too easily corrupted. The traveler walked up the terraces slowly, imagining the elders sitting upon them. One terrace for questioning fear. One for questioning identity. One for questioning purpose. One for questioning action. One for questioning silence itself. He reached the highest terrace. There, engraved faintly into the stone, he found a line of script, nearly erased by centuries of rain. But the carving technique was unmistakable. The sharp diagonal cuts, the curved echoes, the clean strokes left by a blade rather than a chisel. He brushed away the moss. The inscription read, "When the world is unclear, the blade should not move." He let the words sink into him. This line contradicted everything outsiders believed about the clan. They were not assassins, not shadows hungry for blood. They intervened only when balance tilted beyond repair, when inaction would invite greater harm. He realized something profound. They were philosophers first, warriors second. Their purpose was not violence. It was equilibrium, not peace which required submission, not justice which required judgment, but equilibrium, the fragile, shifting tension between chaos and order. He stood there a long time, letting the mountain air fill his lungs, letting the meaning of the inscription ripple through him. The clan's power had never come from their techniques. It had come from their understanding of the human heart. The traveler descended the terraces, reaching the bottom once more. He gazed into the water. The reflection staring back at him felt altered. His face partly his own, partly shaped by the echo of everything he had learned. He was beginning to understand why the clan had chosen him. Not because he was strong, not because he was skilled, not because he sought glory, because he questioned, because he listened, because he searched for meaning rather than triumph, and because he carried the same flaw and the same gift that once fractured the clan: memory, the ability to remember self while reaching beyond it. The philosophy of the hidden clan was a paradox. To become no one, one must first understand oneself completely. He knelt beside the water, not to drink, but to breathe, slowly, deeply, matching breath with the stillness of the pool. The air vibrated gently, as though the amphitheater exhaled with him. Then, faintly, something shifted behind him. A footstep, silent, controlled, intentional. He did not turn. He did not speak. He simply waited. A presence approached, light, graceful, patient. A shadow fell beside him, reflected in the water. A tall figure, masked, robed in black, standing with the posture of someone who had mastered the very philosophy he had just begun to grasp. The traveler bowed his head slightly, not in submission but acknowledgement. The figure stood silently. Then, slowly, deliberately, it extended one hand. Not a weapon, not a signal, an invitation. The traveler's breath caught. He had entered the heart of their philosophy. And now, the clan was ready to show him what lay beyond thought, beyond doctrine, beyond silence. He rose, heart trembling but steady, and stepped toward the figure. The next revelation would not be about history or tradition. It would be about joining the path, or turning away forever. The traveler followed the masked figure into a narrowing passage that opened into a cavern alive with mist and the distant murmur of falling water. Within this chamber, a circle of elders waited silent, unmoving, each mask uniquely aged with cracks and faded lacquer. Their presence felt ancient, like standing before living relics who had shaped history from the shadows. The figure who brought him stepped into the ring, completing it. The elders inhaled simultaneously, a single breath that shifted the air like a tide. The traveler felt it wash over him, not threatening, but evaluating him in silence deeper than words. One elder approached and circled him with slow, deliberate steps. The traveler sensed no hostility, only assessment. When the elder returned to face him, he extended a folded cloth. Inside it lay a black lacquered mask lined with characters representing intention, surrender, and clarity. The meaning was unmistakable. This was not acceptance, but a test of understanding. The traveler hesitated, aware that wearing the mask meant stepping fully into their truth. Another elder stepped forward with a warning gesture, showing an ancient strip of cloth with symbols meaning. Erase nothing you do not understand. The traveler finally understood. This was not about obedience or joining them. It was about intention. He lifted the mask and placed it on his face. The cavern breathed in unison. Warmth rippled through him, calm, grounding, aligning. For the first time, he felt the world sharpen without narrowing. The elders stepped back, opening the circle. The one who brought him knelt and drew a symbol in the mist meaning. Begin. They guided him toward a darker corridor at the cavern's edge. Not a test of skill, a test of self. The path of shadows waited. The traveler stepped into darkness so complete it swallowed sound. The elders remained behind. This path had no guide. The mask narrowed his senses until only breath and heartbeat anchored him. Slowly, faint bioluminescent glow revealed the first chamber, a circle of moss-lit stone. When he closed his eyes, the chamber shifted. He opened them to find a moonlit bamboo forest. A masked figure stood ahead, tapping a staff against the ground. The bamboo swayed and rearranged, forming a shifting maze. The test wasn't physical, it measured clarity. Fear fed the maze. Calm quieted it. With slow breaths, he let the noise inside him settle. The bamboo responded, parting into a small clearing. The masked figure now wore his own face. It began circling him, then multiplied. Dozens of identical reflections surrounded him. He felt panic rising, but remembered the elder's teaching. A blade should not move when the world is unclear. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the chamber had returned. Still, silent, unchanged. The second chamber tested intention. Mist formed shadowy figures practicing ancient forms. They multiplied until the room felt crowded. When his intention wavered, shadows grew chaotic. When it steadied, they merged into a single balanced figure before dissolving. The third chamber was complete darkness. No illusions, no figures, only silence pressing against him. It held all he avoided: fear, doubt, memory. This was surrender, not of identity but of distortion. He let each emotion rise, acknowledged it, released it. The darkness softened. A faint glow returned. The masked elder stood before him, bowing deeply, not to welcome him, but to honor what he had released. Behind the elder, a stone archway waited. The final threshold. Beyond the archway, the mountain opened into a vast circular chamber lit by an inner golden glow. At its center rested a stone platform holding an object wrapped in silk. No elders stood guard. This was not a test. It was revelation. The traveler approached and unwrapped the cloth. A scroll lay inside, heavy with age and intention. Its wooden rods bore the clan's oldest characters. When he unrolled it, the philosophy he had sought for so long unfolded before him, not as ritual but as truth. Strength without intention is destruction. Intention without clarity is blindness. Clarity without compassion is emptiness. Line after line overturned every myth. The clan's purpose had never been assassination or secrecy. They were not blades, they were witnesses. They intervened only when imbalance threatened to swallow what could still be saved. They preserved silence not to hide, but to listen. He read the heart of their doctrine. A warrior who sees only enemies does not see truth. A warrior who sees only justice does not see truth. A warrior who sees only self cannot see at all. The scroll revealed their greatest choice. After the splintering, elders had unmasked themselves and dispersed into the world. The clan lived on not in warriors, but in influence. Rituals, breathing, gestures passed quietly into villages. The scroll ended with a teaching he felt settle into his bones. When the world is unclear, remain still. When the world is wounded, reflect its truth. An elder wearing the white and gold mask entered silently. They bowed not to him but to the moment. The path ahead was not membership, not ritual, not secrecy. It was understanding. The elder stepped aside, revealing one more tunnel. The final revelation waited within the mountain's deepest heart. The tunnel carried the traveler deeper until the rock walls widened into a vast chamber filled with a quiet, glowing lake. The elder stopped at its shore and motioned forward. The water glimmered with a soft, inner light, reflecting nothing yet revealing everything. When the elder whispered, the lake stirred, and ripples began to unfold like pages of a book written in motion. Images emerged, memories, not illusions. He watched a masked figure kneeling beside a dying soldier, offering comfort instead of death. He saw villagers guided silently to safety while invaders slept. He saw elders meeting monks under half-moons. Each scene revealed that intervention was compassion, not violence. Then the lake darkened, shifting to the night of splintering. The traveler saw the young warrior whose doubt had cracked centuries of unity. Tears, fear, defiance. Not a villain, a man overwhelmed by memory. The clan fractured not from ambition, but from the human struggle between self and surrender. The lake changed again, showing fragments of splinter groups wandering through harsh lands, distorted echoes of the original philosophy. Then the main clan leaving their wisdom quietly in dances, rituals, breath techniques, threads woven through villages for generations. Finally, he saw the Meiji scholar and anthropologist. Not kidnapped, not harmed, welcomed. Both had chosen to vanish into understanding, their lives transformed beyond ordinary paths. The lake revealed one last image, him, walking, observing, breathing in silence, chosen not for strength, but for clarity. When the water dimmed, the elder bowed and offered the truth with a single word, understand. The traveler realized he had not discovered the clan's secret. He had become part of it. The path ahead was no longer about history. It was responsibility. Sunlight struck him as he stepped out of the mountain, warm and startling after the cavern's silence. The world below stretched in layers of green fields, winding rivers, and distant rooftops. Everything looked familiar yet transformed, as if the valley itself breathed differently now. The mask in his pack felt neither heavy nor symbolic. It felt honest, like something meant to travel with him. He descended slowly, noticing details he had once overlooked. A shrine angled toward a hidden ridge, stones arranged in patterns too deliberate to be accidents, terraced fields shaped by hands that once trained for stillness. The clan's influence lay everywhere, dissolved into the landscape like old ink fading into paper. Reaching the abandoned settlement of the scattered descendants, he left a quiet bow at the shrine, respect for those who preserved fragments of knowledge without understanding their source. Cranes circled overhead, and he sensed their silent acknowledgement before they disappeared into the treeline. By late afternoon, he reached the outskirts of a village. Life moved simply, farmers working, children laughing, dogs barking. The ordinary world continued unaware of the mountain's truth. Yet he saw patterns in every gesture. The balanced steps of a passerby, the disciplined breath of a craftsman, the calm stance of an elderly woman sweeping her porch. They did not know the origin of these habits, but the clan did. He paused near a bridge where an old man fed birds. Their brief conversation, casual and warm, reminded him that wisdom hides in ordinary voices. The old man's final words echoed the elder's philosophy. Those who listen see. As dusk deepened, the traveler continued toward the train station. He was stepping back into society, but not returning as the same man. He now carried silence as sight. Night covered the countryside as the traveler approached the small town. Lanterns glowed behind windows, and crickets murmured in the shadows. He paused on a bridge, watching fish drift beneath reflected stars. The mask sat in his pack like a quiet reminder, not of a duty assigned, but a way of being learned. Entering the town, he moved through streets where life unfolded unhurried. A woman passed carrying groceries, a cyclist glided by with calm balance, and distant laughter drifted from a home. Nothing extraordinary, yet everything felt precise, meaningful. The world had always spoken. Only now did he understand its language. At a small square, an elderly man feeding birds greeted him warmly. Their conversation was simple, but the old man's words carried deeper resonance. Mountain trails change those who listen. The traveler recognized the truth disguised in casual wisdom. The clan was not isolated in mountains. They lived quietly through people like this, who walked with unspoken clarity. He continued toward the train station, purchased a ticket, and sat inside as the train slid through darkened fields. The mask rested beside him. In the window's reflection, his face and the mask overlapped. Two identities, one intention. He repeated the scroll's final teachings in silence. Presence, intention, clarity. A philosophy requiring no temple, no ritual, no vows, only awareness. The train entered a brighter city. Neon signs flickered. People rushed past. Cars honked. The noise of modern life swelled around him. Yet he remained calm, centered, aligned. The mountain's silence had not left him. It had become part of him. He walked into the city lights with steady breath and a quiet heart. He was no longer a seeker. He was a witness. And the hidden clan lived on through the way he now saw the world.